guitar?
I don't know.
What do you best?
You want an original song? Or?
Yeah, just it.
Maybe someday only stand my lack of faith. Maybe someday only stand baby. Maybe someday understand that alcohol's my friend. Maybe someday you'll understand heroin again. Maybe someday I can be like you. Maybe someday I'll be just as motherfucking cool as you. Maybe someday I'll be so. Maybe someday I can be a motherfucking hipster too. Maybe someday I'll understand my lack of faith. Maybe someday you'll understand the anguish and pain. Maybe someday I'll understand that alcohol's my friend. Maybe someday you'll understand addiction again. Maybe someday I can be like you. Maybe someday soon someone will love me just as much as you. Maybe someday
Did you write that?
Sitting right here, I wrote it, pissed off at all these.
Yeah.
I probably don't have to tell you.
This is Arn Ra. He's an atheist, and I'm a multi-axial theist. What do you think about theists and atheists getting along?
I think it's awesome.
Is it awesome?
Totally.
Yeah.
There's something bigger and better than us, and we don't know what the fuck it is.
There we go.
I mean, that's the bottom line. And these people down here are like, Christ. I'm like, okay. But I know I know it in my heart. I felt love before. That's brilliant and beautiful and fucking super strong. But I've seen a lot of the world. I'm not young.
The world is real. We both see this guy, so we touch him. So we're going to take that as a kind of group given and observe that. From that, we're going to get lots of beliefs. We start putting those beliefs together. Quine's example was a spider web, into a web of belief. Many of those, the first ones we do, have to do with direct observations. They're kind of subjective, they're kind of objective, but direct observations. Some of them later on will be philosophical beliefs that tie the two together. For example, the assumption by everyone who does science and who does philosophy that the universe is regular. Whether there's a God or not, theists assume that God is regular. That's how science was able to be born out of religion. People like William of Ockham had good reason to think that you shouldn't multiply entities needlessly, because God would be regular, he would design with strategy. Those beliefs, hang on, so some are very externally constrained, the things we choose to accept as externally verified. Then there are second kinds of sub-beliefs that are themselves philosophical to help all the beliefs cohere. Now, what we would want to do is do this. Do our observations make sense of the world as we seem to be observing it? That's where science can help us. Second, do the philosophical beliefs that we picked up cohere and make all those beliefs work together without cheating, without being irrational, without, just saying something because I want to believe it? That web of belief is sadly never going to be certainly true, because however we develop it, to give you the big thing, this is where Shermer conceded that this is the case, and where theism can't be called irrational and just fideism. To pick between idealism as a general belief and materialism as a general belief, or dualism as a general belief, will never have anything to do with science. It will have to do with philosophical preferences based on, for example, I could do the same science
That's why I strike it as being irrelevant when we bring it up.
No, it isn't irrelevant in this way. Daniel Dennett, to hold to materialism, it's not an attack on Dennett. Dennett himself says this, has to assume in the end that mind doesn't exist. That he, Daniel Dennett, doesn't exist. It's what he calls the Cartesian theater, where, our brains trick us into believing we exist. There are just a series of brain states.
If I may.
Now, that's a high cost. The advantage to dualism/theism would be I can do science. In fact, I do the exact same science as Dennett, but I don't have to assume, because I'm not a materialist. Let's say I'm an idealist. I'm in fact not, but the simplest way to go is idealism. I can assume that Daniel Dennett exists. Now, I don't care how much science we talk about. Science is never going to be able to choose between those two worlds. And here's the work one does. In one world, Daniel Dennett doesn't exist. He's a series of brain states. In another world, those same series of brain states exist, but Daniel Dennett exists. Now, that's a philosophic preference, and philosophers could bet back and forth, but science isn't going to determine it. Now I'm done. Now you can attack the view, but that's the view. The view isn't that we should just leap out there and believe anything, or that everything's subjective.
Okay. So, what I often do when I'm getting into debates with theists is I try to get them to agree that reality is real by definition, because I hate that every time I try to bring up evidence, it immediately turns into how do we know anything, where suddenly we can't know that we even exist. So in a recent debate, or a debate I had about a year ago, I told the guy at the beginning, I said, your position is so weak that the only way that you can be right is if reality is wrong. And very quickly, usually at the beginning of the debate, you will tell me that in some way that reality is telling me that I can't even prove that I in fact existed 2 weeks ago, because I might be a brain in a vat and all my memories might be false. And I said, thank you for telling me that reality might not be real, exactly as I predicted you would do.
Okay.
Now, if I may throw out something
go ahead.
else. Now, if I'm listening to your presentation and I get the other thing, so I say, well, of course, you wouldn't have seen it that way. You wouldn't have seen it as a contradiction of the other thing that you said. That's a fair statement and not remotely an insult. Would you understand that?
Go ahead. What is it?
That's what Christianity is.
I
It's
think-
giving details about something.
I think that you don't understand that if you're talking to a philosopher, whether they're a theist way, that it isn't that I want to deny reality. It is that by the time I nail down...
I do exactly the opposite. I use very precise definitions.
Excellent.
Okay, so an example I was talking about with somebody else, I was looking around, he's not here anymore, but he says that something about being just animals, because it's the evolutionary view that we're just animals. And I said, well, you realize that whether God exists or not, either way, you're still an animal. I don't believe I'm an animal, he says. Okay. An animal is any multicellular eukaryote
From
with an internal
Aristotle
digestive
forward,
tract,
almost
right?
all Christians at almost all places, at almost all times, have believed that humans are animals in an interesting and important sense of the term. So I agree with you.
So but it's not a point of whether you agree with me.
Right.
The point is the person I'm talking to admits that he's a multicellular eukaryote with an internal digestive tract, but says he doesn't believe he's an animal. Except this is a fact, right? And it's objectively verifiable. But he's denying it because he doesn't want to believe it.
In fact, what you've described isn't a fact, even on your view of facts.
It's
It's
not
a
an objectively
definition.
verifiable
No,
point of data.
what you've done is define the English term animal as it's used in science using a set of criteria. If we accept that set of criteria, then you're right, he should have agreed that he was an animal. But notice, you're dealing with the definition of a word, you're not dealing with facts. So, for example, last night...
How am I not dealing with facts? Is it a fact that we are all multicellular eukaryotes?
Good.
Is it a fact that we've matched the definition?
Yes.
Okay.
No, listen to what you're saying, because in fact, this is a good point.
Are you sure it's a fact?
It is a fact that we're multicellular. It is a choice within the English language to use the term animal to describe something that has the following factual characteristics. So it is an accident of language that we use the term animal, or even glump certain characteristics together to use the phrase animal. Not everybody divides taxonomy up the same way, recall. So the definition, once we accept your definition of animal, and we should, that's the way people use the term animal in science and not being clever. Agreeing with a definition, however, is different than agreeing with a fact. If I disagreed we were multicellular, I'd be disagreeing with a fact, as you're using fact.
Denying animals is the same as denying eukaryote. Because a eukaryote only implies that all your cells have a nucleus, including
So
your blood
I
cells at one
must
stage.
be being very unclear. So let me try it this way. Let's invent the invented word gavagai. And we're going to say the word gavagai means attached rabbit parts.
I got a better example for you. Right? I was born in mid-October. There are people that call me Libra. I meet the definition of Libra. Can I decide that I'm not a Libra because I don't want to be?
Right.
I don't. This is why I said rules apply to me that do not apply to theists.
No.
Because I can't just say that if the definition defines me, or if it describes me, that it defines me. Right?
But notice that
regardless whether I believe in astrology or not.
Notice contradicting a definition is different than contradicting a fact. That's all. I'm making one simple point. You asked me, you said, I want to be very clear and precise in my language. So I'm trying to be very clear and precise in my language. What the person disagreed with, they shouldn't have disagreed, was not with facts, but with your definition.
Okay, so how do I verify that I'm using the correct definition?
If you had started, and you did, I think that they were wrong to do what they did, by saying, I'm going to define animal with this set of facts. Do you agree that you have all those factual characteristics? And they said yes. And they had already accepted or the community's, agreed to prior definition. Then they should have logically accepted that they were an animal.
Thank you.
But
Because he did.
But notice,
Is it Chinese, English is a second language.
it's his second language,
Anyway,
right?
But just
But notice that if we got into a discussion of what was an animal, we're going to actually end up discussing which bundle of facts to put in the definition of animal. And so the disagreement might not be about facts, but classification systems, which scientists do all the time, right? So I have good friends who are biologists. I'm not one. I don't, do biology for a living. And they go back and forth on what kinds of classification systems would be best for understanding the natural world, how to subdivide the natural world. Is it useful to talk about animals as opposed to non-animals? And so they argue about that. Notice when they argue about that, they're arguing about definitions, which is an important thing to argue about. That's what we're talking about now,
I'm the
not about
director-
facts.
I'm the director of the Phylogeny Explorer project.
E-
and
excellent.
It's a taxonomic website, essentially.
Right,
The entire tree of life rendered
right.
as a navigable online encyclopedia.
I've been there.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, I knew that from reading your bio on phylogeny. I should have said it that way. So great, that's a good thing. But notice when you do that, you're dealing with definition sets. And if somebody came to you and said, wow, I prefer, a different, I prefer to look at the tree of life differently. I'm not even talking about disputing Darwinism or things. We'd like to run the cladograms differently. We'd like to say this is related to that. We'd like to redefine things. You wouldn't be having an argument about facts. You'd be having an important argument about how to define those facts. And why is that important? Because those definitions give us a tree of life, or they give us relationships that might help us see other relationships. Now, what does that have to do with what we're discussing? My suggestion to you is this. A lot of discussions, at least from what I'm hearing, you're using words in ways that philosophers would not use them. So it's creating confusion in your listeners because they'll say, no, I don't think that's a fact.
So how do you define a fact then?
I would say,
Because again, I'm being as precise as I possibly can. I go to every definitive source I can. I see where they hold consensus, and I summarize what they're all saying.
let me ask you a question. When it comes to deciding definitions of terms like fact, argument, logic, terms. What career field deals with those?
I don't know the name.
It's philosophy of language. So what we would do, and what you should do, because I do this on the fly, because I give you a bad one, and then my grad professors would yell at me. Go to a decent philosophy of language book, get a term for term, find out what terms mean, find out what facts mean to those people. It's not going to stop you from doing science. It is going to produce a kind of linguistic clarity that will help you win an argument where you've actually won an argument with what the person believes instead of winning an argument by winning it through confusion.
Do you use a different definition of fact than I do?
Yeah, I do.
What is your definition of fact?
It is a mind-independent reality that may or may not be knowable by me.
Okay, I don't see that as being significantly different than what I'm talking about.
It will turn out to be.
Okay, there's a chevron shape on the moon Miranda, one of the moons of Neptune, I believe it is, and it wasn't observed until 20 years ago.
Right.
But clearly, this thing existed out in space, a result of some undescribed event before we knew about it.
Yeah, as far as we know.
So we'll both call that a fact.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
in the
a
sense
point of
I'm
data.
using,
That's a point of data that we can also objectively verify.
I'm not. I'd have to talk about data and exactly what you think data is.
Okay, now if we want to propose,
can I just point out that you've gone from using the word fact to the word data, and the word fact and data aren't the same thing.
Okay.
Not all data would turn out to be facts.
Right.
For example,
So-
the number 1.
So if we want to propose that a moon we have yet to see has this shape on it, and we don't yet know that, is that a fact?
That would be a proposal about, it's a hypothesis about what we would find.
Can you say that it's a fact?
No.
Then we agree.
Good. So clarity is awesome. And there's nothing about theism that harms that in any way. In fact, the reason people originally believed that in the Western parts of the world was because of theism.
I would argue otherwise because it is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true, and you agreed with that a moment ago.
What you
Yet that's
just
what
said
all religions do.
is it's dishonest to argue as fact
Assert as fact.
that which is not evidently true. What do you mean by evidently true?
You're going to say, it's okay to say that you believe X, but you can't state that X is true.
Do you have a mind?
Yes.
Good. Do scientists like Richard Dennett agree that you have a mind? Daniel Dennett, I'm sorry. No, they don't in fact agree on it. So it isn't self-evident that you have a mind. We're taking it as a working hypothesis. So lots of things we take as working hypotheses, maybe even the existence of God, aren't facts in the brute given of the chevron shape on a moon. Those are actually really simple things to deal with.
So when we have a handful...
Complex phenomena like minds are harder to deal with because there could be many ways of explaining them.
Okay. So when a handful of theists arguing with each other, giving specific details about God and all of them contradict each other, they all being honest? Because they're all asserting absolute truth.
It could be that all of them are wrong, that some of them are wrong, or that one of them is right. All of those are logically possible. We'd have to listen to them.
If any of them said that there was a chevron on a moon that we haven't seen yet, and it hasn't been seen, so how would we know? Is that person being honest?
I wouldn't say they were being dishonest as much as being foolish.
Okay, well, I think we can compromise on that. Because if you have a handful of people all asserting as fact conflicting
We're doing
beliefs.
fun, weird Socratic dialogue that has a kind of outcome. I teach Socratic dialogue. You want to be careful about using Socratic dialogue when you have the end in mind. because it's ersatz
don't.
Socratic dialogue. Okay, go ahead then.
I was trying to illustrate something.
Go ahead.
Okay. The effect of it's whether you call it dishonest. I would say it's dishonest to say that you know something that
Okay.
you don't know.
Well, let's
I
call it
can't-
dishonest.
Okay, because I mean you're saying you know something you don't know.
I don't think there's moral intent, and I think dishonesty. See, this is again, we're back to terms. You shift from one term to the other. I think dishonesty requires moral intent. I think a lot of times people say dumb things that they shouldn't say, but they have no intent to deceive.
Okay, and my definition of a lie does include that they must have the intent to deceive.
Good. Then
But
they're not lying.
intellectually, the term intellectually dishonest still applies here.
No, you could only be intellectually dishonest. So, for example, my grandmother, who was taught in school, in her public school, that breast milk was bad for babies and that you should use government certified milk, and went around telling people that even after she should have known better, but she only went through 8th grade, so she didn't. She wasn't being intellectually dishonest. She was just wrong. But she was saying that in good faith.
So it's not dishonest to pretend to know things you don't know.
It would be dishonest to pretend to know things you don't know, but not to be mistaken that you know things that you don't know. For example, in my opinion, you are wrong that God doesn't exist. And your logic is flawed on things like the ontological argument. But I would never say that you are intellectually dishonest, because I assume in intellectual good faith you've just come to a different conclusion than I have. Being wrong isn't a moral sin, even from an atheist point of view.
Okay,
Right?
so Seitan Bruggencate somehow meets Sir Isaac Newton. Both make the same argument at each other, and I've seen this. Sir Isaac Newton wrote that he was chosen by God to have a higher understanding of the Scripture than any other man. And being the most brilliant man possibly in history, that's a fair thing for him to say. He probably has a better understanding of those things than any other man.
Well, except here's the problem. If I keep picking on what you're saying, it just sounds like I'm delaying you. But that's crazy, right? It's really silly to think that because someone has a high IQ, they're more likely to hear from God than someone with a low IQ.
Agreed. I'm not making that point.
So Newton, in fact, it isn't sensible. What you said was, well, if anybody had a right to say that, it would be, no, lots of people have the right to say that. You don't have to have a high IQ to hear me. Right?
Given the context of the rest of the sentence, it would have made sense.
Okay.
Because his opponent is Seitan Bruggencate, a man who isn't trained in anything, who also makes the same claim. And both claim that they have this direct revelation from God, which is not God talking to them, but rather God talking to them through the Scriptures. So they're both reading the Scriptures, and basically what they're both doing is they're both interpreting the Scriptures, what they think it means, and then both claiming that God is telling them this through the Scriptures, and that they both have a higher understanding of the Scriptures
Right.
than any other man. Now, if both of these men agreed, I wouldn't have much that I could say about that, except that they disagree on a key point. And so I hit Seitan Bruggencate with this. Sir Isaac Newton says that Jesus was not a divine being, that he was not the product of God. You say he is. You both are inspired by God, told by God, the absolute truth. You can't know anything unless you know everything. The only way you can know anything is if you know someone who knows everything. But since you don't know everything, you don't know if you know somebody who knows everything.
Okay, none of that is true. So you've just
Which one
gone
is
through a
being
long
dishonest, or either is either?
you've just gone through a long rant, none of which I concede. So now you've set up
Now
a
I've gotten
false
to the
dilemma.
question. I didn't. I asked you, is either of them being dishonest?
I can't know the answer to that without using a science called hermeneutics, which I use as a secularly trained philosopher to understand something like Plato. The fact that we all read the text of Plato and are sometimes unsure of what Plato means doesn't mean Plato didn't exist, or that Plato didn't write a book, or that Plato isn't talking to us. It just means we need to have long philosophic dialogue using the science called hermeneutics, which I went through way too many grad seminars trying to decide what was right. So either both of them are wrong, one of them is right, or both of them are right because there's some meta theory that makes what they've said not contradict but cohere. I probably don't think the third one is true. And so I would want to look at the first two possibilities and have a long discussion. Why cut off
So is
discussion?
either one, because you said that Sir Isaac Newton, even compared to Seyten-Bergenkate, Sir Isaac Newton is still not justified in making that statement.
I didn't say he wasn't justified. I said his IQ had nothing to do with the justification.
It's the only thing he's got going on. It
No,
wouldn't
that's
give him
not
any more
true.
credence
He
than
could
it
be
would.
particularly pious. He could particularly good reader of text. Forget God and the Bible for a minute, making it so really complicated. If we're both reading Plato's Republic, and you say Cephalus, whose name means big head, leaves so the discussion can continue. And I say, no, I don't think that's quite right. I think he leaves because he represents religious piety, and religion has to leave for the discussion to continue. We both can't be right, and so we have a long discussion looking at the text, examining the manuscript, and we finally come to the conclusion that you're right and I'm wrong, or we just agree to disagree. We're not sure, because textual interpretation is not an exact science.
So what I'm getting is that you should not state as fact what is not evidently true. Like my wife was raised in a family divided between Catholics and Protestants, both telling her that the other parent was going to hell because they're in the wrong religion. So both factions of that
What do you
family.
mean by evidently true? You've never defined it. Certainly true?
Evidently was the way I defined
Yeah,
it for you.
I would never, ever, even as a philosopher in Plato studies, say it's a fact that my interpretation of the text is true. It would simply be true that my interpretation of the text is true. That's not a fact
As you
type thing.
correctly observed, I primarily deal with fundamentalists because my argument primarily is against creationism, and more specifically,
I'm a young Earth creationist, so I'm okay to talk to you about that. But I'm not a fundamentalist either. So I think I'm a little different than what you usually deal with. But that's okay. You can pretend I am. What I'm saying is your whole dilemma fails for this reason. I don't have to pick between the two of them, nor do I have to doubt that the Bible's the Word of God, nor do I have to do anything else. I just suspend judgment. Now the fact,
which is what I was arguing for.
here's good news. They don't have to suspend judgment, because the way research works is I read a book, I work really hard on it, I think I know what it says, I write a learned paper about it, and I assert this is what Plato means.
Okay.
And then someone contradicts me, and we don't kill each other. We have a giant seminar where we talk about our two views, and we may persist in disagreeing. But I'm not being a liar to leave the seminar and say, I think Plato says this.
I mean, I'm not just saying that lies are the only form of dishonesty. That you can be dishonest with yourself and not realize that you're lying.
Sure.
Okay.
But neither people in your case need to be doing that. They might be. I'd have to look at it.
Okay. You also said I didn't define evidence, but I did. I said that evidence is a body of objectively verifiable facts which are positively indicative of or exclusively.
Yes, I know you have that memorized, but we already moved
But
through
you
the
said
fact
we
that
didn't-
objective
you said I didn't
facts don't
define it.
exist.
I did define it.
Yes,
And
your definition is no
So when I
good.
say now that something that we shouldn't assert as fact that which is not evidently true, then I'm obviously talking about things that we can't show the facts to indicate that.
Yeah, lots of things are true for which there are no facts. 2 + 2 is 4 is
Which-
known to be true
which is demonstrable.
without any right, but without any facts as you've defined.
I'm sorry, you said it wasn't even empirical, which it is.
2 + 2 = 4 is an empirical truth.
It also works with logic.
No, I'm sorry. You need to go get a book on philosophy of
I
mathematics.
just got a dictionary. It said it-
No. Mathematics, the number 1 does not exist in the physical world. So any truth of mathematics cannot be a truth of the empirical world by definition.
But you can demonstrate.
No, that math happens to work more or less is an amazing thing, and philosophers still wrestle with why that's true. Theists have a reason for it. Everyone else takes it as a brute given. But it's not an empirically known thing. You couldn't possibly know that math was going to work through empiricism.
Demonstrate. Repeated.
No, it just works.
Which means it's repeated. It's demonstrably repeatable.
You seem to
Repeated
think that
demonstrable.
something has to be repeatable to be true.
Not necessarily.
Right. So good. Let's eliminate that. And
We
facts.
agreed that the Chevron
Not
existed
everything,
before
right?
anybody knew about it.
That's right, and that does fit your definition of fact. But not everything does.
Okay, so
And
clearly,
facts are not objective.
so clearly, when I say that people should not assert as fact what is not evidently true, what I am saying is that people shouldn't make a statement that they know something that they can't give any indication that that is even true.
This is wrong.
In other words, we can't distinguish this from the illusions of delusion.
No, scholarship would be impossible if that were true. In scholarship all the time, I do the best I can. I look at the world, I look at the text, I look at my experience, I make the best judgment I can. I assert that as far as I can tell, something is true. It turns out not to be true. I'm not being a liar. I'm advancing the cause of scholarship. Being wrong is okay. Hooray for being wrong.
If you say that you know things you don't know, I would still call that dishonest.
Only if you should know better. In other words, if I'm working...
Shouldn't you know better than to know things you do, than to say you know things you don't know?
That has nothing to do with what I just said, but it's kind of clever. It would make a good Twitter handle. I may steal it from you. Here's what I'm saying. If I study a manuscript or I study the natural world and I make an extrapolation from the manuscript or an extrapolation from the natural world, I might be wrong. I might even be seriously wrong. But if I present my views, I have to say something like this. This is what I think is true. I may even say, I know it's true. I've thought about it a long time. No in the loose sense, not that I'm certain, but this is the best I can do. You disagree with me, we have an argument. I haven't been naughty or intellectually disingenuous. I haven't broken the laws of reason. In fact, that's how reason moves forward. Throwing out an idea that you've investigated the best you can and discovering you're wrong. Let me give you an example. Aristotle talks about the nature of substance in Metaphysics, Book Zeta. I spent 14 weeks trying to understand what Aristotle meant by ousia in Metaphysics, Book Zeta. I decided it meant stuff. Matter, crude matter. I presented that in a paper in a grad program, doing the best I can. Man, it turned out that I became persuaded by someone else in my grad program that that was entirely wrong. They didn't say, wow, Reynolds, you should have known better than that. You're being a liar, you're being disingenuous. That's the way scholarship works. In another case, I had a view about how Plato worked. My good friend Hud had a different view about Plato works. Hud's now teaching philosophy, I think, at Washington. And I'm, starting a new school. We still disagree, but I don't think Hud's a liar. I just think we
agree. And I'm not in the position you're trying to box me into. I mean, myself, I come to the passage of the Bible that you'll probably be able to tell me where it is better than I can. The bit about the four-legged locusts that have legs above their feet, right? I interpret that as, since we know that grasshoppers, typically called locusts, don't have four legs, that maybe they're talking about bats, because the Bible tends to classify things by what they do rather than what they are, which is why whales are fish and bats are birds. Bats could also be locusts because they go about on all fours as described, and that they also swarm. So this is an interpretation that could be supported by what I'm saying.
Sure.
I'm not saying that I know that.
Sure.
I'm suggesting that this might be.
Well, if I know you mean you're certain, you could study it long enough and look at all the arguments where I think it's a useful sense of the word know to say, yeah, I think this is right. And I'm going to base my book on it. I'm going to write this. I'm going to say you should believe it, because I think it's true.
I would still put that as an hypothesis if I can't verify
Great.
that is.
Good. We'll use that term then, hypothesis. And so imagine that's what Sir Isaac Newton and his friend were doing. They were both strongly advancing hypotheses about what the text said. Which one was right? I don't know. I'd have to look at both interpretations.
Sir Isaac Newton and his friend. You don't know who Seitan Bergenkeit is.
No, I don't know that background
now
story.
I can truly tell you that you are blessed.
Good. So here's the point. There's no dilemma there. In other words, it's just normal scholarship. We'd sit down and look at their interpretation of text.
Right.
And they both could be wrong.
Right.
Or one of them could be right. So
I have the feeling that since we began talking, that you've been arguing against something I wasn't saying.
well, what are you saying?
I don't even remember. It's been so long.
So far, I think what you've said
But
is
I've been
that
trying
he
to
is,
find where what you're saying is relevant to where I was going. And although I lost where I was going, I never found where it was relevant.
Well, you started by
to
saying that theists are not good because theists, and you've got
that
a little...
is actually not remotely what I said. I said there are rules that apply to me that don't apply to, and we just call them believers. The rules apply to me that don't apply to believers.
As far as I can tell, that's not true.
Okay, I have to, you said reserve judgment when you can't be sure.
Right.
That's the rule that applies to me. But you can't be sure there's a God, but you're still going to say that there is. So you're going to maintain a belief even though you can't be sure of it. You said last night that we can never know whether there's a God. But there's people all over the place who say that they know that there's a God, that they talk to him, that they have a personal relationship.
Yeah, you're simply equivocating about the word no. I think I know that
I don't
you
think
have...
I'm equivocating.
No,
I think
wait,
I'm stating a fact.
Hang on. I think there are two useful senses of the word no. There's knowing something with what philosophers call Cartesian certainty. I know that 2 + 2 = 4. Once I understand that concept, I at least, and most people, find it impossible to doubt it. It's indubitable. Most truths turn out not to be like that at all, especially interesting ones. I say I know my wife Hope loves me, but I know plenty of people who have turned out to be deceived, even though they had very little data. Like, it was reasonable for them to believe their spouse loved them. They acted on it, they built their whole lives on it, and it turned out they were just wrong. But we didn't run over them to say, wow, you're intellectually dishonest, you should have had a better epistemology.
Never what I said.
No, let me finish. When I say I know there's a God, I'm saying that's the best hypothesis I have. I think there's good reason to believe it. I think there's good philosophic reason. I think I have good experiential reason. And I think I have good communitarian and cultural reasons to believe it. Could I be wrong? First, I could be wrong to be a Christian. Someone else could be right in their interpretation of the divine. Sure, absolutely. Have those discussions all the time. Could I be wrong that God exists? Absolutely. So I don't have, and as far as I know, no Christian believes Cartesian certainty that God exists, unless, and one caveat, the ontological argument works. If the ontological argument works, then I can say that I'm certain there is a greatest possible being. We'll call him God. But that doesn't get me to the God of the Bible anyway. There'd be a big logical gap. So since I think the ontological argument probably works, that it's valid in its current form, and it persuades me, I can say I'm certain that the greatest possible being exists. We'll call it God. But that doesn't give me certainty about Christianity. I'm not at all certain that Christianity is true.
I think what I said that you objected to, and I can't, like I said, I can't remember because it was so long ago, but I remember one of the things that I said that you contested was that the purpose of religion was to make people believe, and you said that wasn't true. I can't think of a religion that doesn't require that. I mean, that's why they're called belief systems. They have required beliefs and they have prohibited beliefs, which by contrast is why free thinkers don't have required beliefs or prohibited beliefs.
Either I agree with you because I think every single human being has a belief system, whether they're materialists, naturalists, atheists, or theists.
I would say no, because I don't have required beliefs and I don't have prohibited beliefs. I'm free to believe whatever I want.
Are you required to do science to believe that the universe is real?
No, I don't have required beliefs. I don't have to believe anything.
Are you required to believe math works?
I'm inclined to hold only to what is
as
true.
Far as that goes, then that's what I believe as a theist. I agree with you. If that's how you want to define knowing and believing, nothing you said is incompatible with Christianity.
So the prize in Christianity is not to believe. You don't get forgiveness if you but believe.
Wait, I thought we had now defined belief in a broader way.
I think you and I use a different definition for belief.
Okay, here's what
when I say I believe something, it means that I suspect that this is true, or partial, or at least probably true, or at least closer to the truth.
Great, that's what
But
I mean.
I don't know.
That's what I mean
But
by
believers seem to express that as a verb, as an act of will,
Oh, they
mind
shouldn't.
over matter.
If they do, they shouldn't.
I hear all the time that if they could only believe hard enough.
Okay,
Which
but
to
notice
me,
we're
when
agreeing.
you say the sentence, if I could only believe hard enough, that sounds like pretend.
Yeah, okay. That person shouldn't say that. So when you meet them, they won't care what I say, but they shouldn't say that. That's sub-Christian. What you just said is what I believe about Christianity, which I believe is an explanation. It's the best explanation given best reason and best experience.
Okay,
Am I sure it's true in a Cartesian sense?
So believing that Jesus is your Savior is not the means of salvation?
My belief that Jesus is the Son of God and He is my Savior is my best explanation.
Your salvation
For
is
the-
not tied to that.
Well, if I'm right, then it is, but I could be wrong.
So if you're right, then it is tied to that.
No, if I'm right, yes, it is tied to it. But notice I don't have to have certainty about my belief to hold it, because we've
didn't
already
require that.
right. We've all agreed on that.
Okay.
So in that sense, religious belief, in that sense, is no different than any other kind of philosophic belief.
Regardless whether we're talking about Christianity or
Uh-huh.
whether we're talking about Islam, I mean, because the Quran says the same
atheism.
thing. No, the atheism is different.
No.
Yes, I haven't gotten to finish the point yet. Regardless whether we're talking about the Bible or whether we're talking about the Quran or we're talking about the Bhagavad Gita, they all praise religious faith and they praise belief, if you but believe. But all these rewards will come if you believe. Atheism, as an exception, does not offer anything if you believe. You don't have to believe.
No.
There's not a belief system. There's no faith required. It is very often, but not always. It is very often the rejection of faith.
Do you act on beliefs?
Yes,
Do you get rewards by acting on beliefs?
only when I'm correct.
Right.
Because I say that only
what I
accurate
would say
information
to
has
you,
practical
the
application.
religion that I believe in, let's forget about everybody else's religion, gives me rewards if I act on it, if I'm correct. So we're just the same.
I don't think so, but I think we're going to be arguing circles
No,
indefinitely.
that's not. No, we're not arguing in circles at all. I'm accepting totally your definition. I'm agreeing with that we should all live like you say atheists believe that we should live, and that we should act based on best reason and best experience, and that's what I'm calling belief. And if I'm right about Christianity, then I'll get treats. Just like if you're right that there's steak over there in the corner and you act on it, you'll get the treat of the steak. So there's nothing weird about this, telling someone, hey, you should believe this because you'll get something good out of it. Could be true if I were an atheist. It could be true if I'm a theist. Now, that doesn't prove theism is true, but it does prove I'm not thinking differently than you are or in some kind of weird religious way. We're not arguing in circles at all. Win. Let me agree with you. I agree with you.
Okay,
Hooray.
we'll just let that be. I think.
But wait, how are we disagreeing?
Because every time I try to start making a statement, you change every part of that statement until I eventually forget what the statement
Okay,
was.
we're not doing that anymore, notice. You have said we should believe things, good atheism. We don't get rewards just for believing them. We get rewards for believing things or not believing them by following the truth. The best
By
evidence and
following the truth,
experience.
which means we withhold a belief is a conviction. So a lack of belief is a lack of conviction, right? So atheism is simply being unconvinced that a magical anthropomorphic immortal really exists.
Okay, so we got a weird description of God, which seems to have come off the Twitter feed. But leaving the insult and the bad
not an
language
insult.
aside, no, it's just false. I don't believe in that God. I don't believe in any magical being.
So, really,
No,
you realize miracle and magic have the same definition.
no, they don't.
They're both the evocation of
Okay,
supernatural forces.
go read Richard Swinburne's book on miracles. He defines miracles. He doesn't define it as magic.
Very few
I know.
people realize that, the miracle and magic have the same definition.
Well, very
the
few,
evocation
very,
of supernatural forces.
very few people realize it because, as Christians understand it, that's not true.
I know that Christians don't realize it. Yeah, I get that. But that they are the same. They are effectively
Okay,
the same
so here's good
definition.
news. However I may have been confusing or naughty or done the wrong thing, we're both agreeing on exactly this. You don't have to be certain to act on a belief. You just have to follow best reason and best experience, do the best you can, and modify your beliefs based on the evidence and based on your experience as you go. And what I'm telling you is, that's what Christians believe you should do, and I think that's what you just said you believe you should do.
I want to make a clarification because I'm an epistovist, is how I identify.
You're what?
Epistovist. Which means that I hold faith as being the most dishonest position it is possible to have. That it is not possible to have a less honest position than faith. Because you're asserting as fact things which are not evidently true, and very often refusing to change your mind.
Your name is Aaron?
Aaron.
Aaron. Can I point out that you're merely repeating exactly the same phraseology, which we showed earlier is inadequate to modern philosophical understanding of data and fact. And you really need to let go of false beliefs you have when they no longer are adequate to explain philosophy.
Right, I'm wholly down with getting rid of any false beliefs.
Right.
However, since I do deal with many young Earth creationists who contradict you on a daily basis, they're all describing faith as belief as an act of will, where you will believe, you will eat the word, as one person described it. You read the most ridiculous thing out of the Bible and embrace each other and say, isn't it wonderful that this thing is true? Making themselves believe, right? Make believe. It's pretending. It's forcing a conviction.
I met an atheist once that couldn't be a Christian because they believed that when Jesus said he was the door, he was made out of wood. But we don't want to win an argument with the stupidest person we can find. We want to win an argument with the person we're actually talking with,
right? So
and try to see the truth. And here's what I'm saying.
So
let me agree with you.
Okay. Let me finish the points that you can understand what you're going to agree with.
All right.
Okay. So, in my perspective, we base our beliefs on evident probabilities, past experience, and so forth.
Great.
And we can be uncertain about those things.
Great.
But that does not qualify as faith.
Great.
Okay. Or we can base our beliefs on faith, which means we're going to believe this anyway. We've already decided we're going to believe
No, I
this.
don't agree that's what faith means.
We didn't have to have evidence to convince us.
No, I don't believe in that kind of faith. Great. So faith.
So what
if
was
we're going
the
to use
evidence
faith
that
that way, if we're going to use faith that way, I don't believe in it. So
Okay.
this thing over
This
here.
is my problem is with the theists I deal with. They make this definition of faith.
Great.
And very
They're
often
wrong.
Okay.
So now let's deal with serious theism of the sort that's been around since Justin Martyr, who's second century apologist,
And
all the way
he's
through.
guilty of the same thing.
No. This is what I do for a living. So let me tell you, here's faith.
Wasn't he the one?
You work from best reason to best experience. You commit yourself, the old Napoleonic phrase, and then you see. And if it doesn't work, you start contradicting data, or it doesn't cohere, or you start saying illogical things, you change your mind. That's what you should do. That's living by faith. Why is it living by faith? Because it's not certain.
So
In other words, it's not seen. Ken Ham's no fan of mine. Google me under the.
But you understand, he's using the definition I give, right?
Well,
he
does.
says no evidence ever, and his website says, and every creationist website that I'm aware of posts a statement of faith wherein they word it differently in different places, but they all admit that they will not, they will never consider any evidence that they're wrong.
Here's good news for you. Ken Ham does not consider me a Christian. So, hooray. I actually consider Ken Ham a Christian because I agree with you when your definition of what I'm calling faith. So, to talk to me in good faith, don't stick me with Ken Ham's definition of what faith is, nor
So
pretend.
this is what I'm disagreeing with the young Earth creationist organizations, the leading ones like ICR and AIG, what they're posting in their statement of faith.
I'm not responsible for what they say. Neither is the Orthodox Church. Neither is the Roman Catholic Church. Neither is the
So
Southern
you
Baptist
understand
Convention.
what I am
Neither
objecting
is.
to. I'm objecting
Sure.
to the definition of faith that you find in all the dictionaries, that you find in Martin Luther's
So
citations.
you agree that theism can be reasonable?
No.
Because we can. But we're following the same rules of reason that you're following. You just disagree with us about the conclusion.
You've asserted a conviction. Okay, you're convinced of something for which there was no evidence to indicate that.
In your opinion, and in my opinion, there was evidence to choose that. Look, I was in grad school. I tutored under atheists. I listened to atheism, thought about atheism really hard, had theistic professors, atheistic professors, tested my beliefs, got to one point in my life where I didn't even want to be a Christian. thought about not being a Christian, examined it, tried to put the world together, tried to follow the rules that I'm accepting that you described as a reasonable life, and I came to a different conclusion than you. So as Professor Shermer said to me last night, we need to lose this adversarial language where all theists are irrationalists, believing in magic.
I'm all about building the bridges. Okay, But you got to remember where I'm coming from, right? This is the chairman of the Board of Education in this state who says is a dentist with no scientific degrees at all, who says someone has to stand up to experts.
So
would you say that that's irrational?
Here's really good news for you, which I keep saying to my atheist friends. If you want me to come and testify in front of the Board of Education and argue exactly what I argued to you, which is we should follow best reason and best evidence, and we should make conclusions as we come up with them, and that's the way we should do a reasonable life, I'm happy to do that. And in fact, in some...
Every man has formed an opinion.
You're claiming that you know the Word of God, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm a doctor of philosophy and history.
Are you? Okay,
Yes, sir.
good.
An opinion is like an asshole. Everybody's got one.
That's a good sock with a good shoe. Let's move on.
It's Christmas time here in Pensacola. Nobody gets gifts here. We just give each other seashells. And as you can see back here, we've got the Christmas lights lit up in the window. We don't use red and green here. We just use orange. It's all orange. If you use red and green, you're considered an outcast. True facts about Florida.
What text base do you use?
According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, it has...
I'm asking you which text base
I'm going to
that
tell
you
you.
use.
It's the King James Version. Let me tell you
King
what.
James Version is not a text base. Being committed to a process, not a conclusion, is extremely valuable in my life and others.
Can these cameras play jingle bells? I noticed they're professional. Signs of professional quality. Number one, camera plays music when you're touching the screen. What's the second sign of a professional camera?
Let me repeat that. I am committed to a
The scene's a process.
okay.
Jesus himself went into the temple with a whip, and he whipped it up.
I'm simply talking about manuscripts. Out of all the manuscripts
What
that were
manuscripts are you talking about?
We're standing here in front of our
Yes, we're standing.
our local penitentiary / retirement home.
What's your story?
I came down here from Jacksonville. My mama, I was born and raised here.
You're wearing a cross. What does that mean to you?
My Father in heaven, I believe He helped me with everything else, everything I need. He helped me with my problem. You know?
Do you ever feel like He's not meeting your needs since you're on the street?
No. He always meet my needs. No matter what goes on, my Father in heaven, He always with me. Because at His time, He don't never give you what you want, He give you what you need. He always meet my needs.
So we're here in downtown Pensacola. On your left, you have me. On your right, you have Dr. Michael W. Jones. And in between, you have this big hole. Dr. Jones, where do you think this hole leads?
To the back of the cannon.
Oh, this is a cannon?
This is a cannon.
Oh, I thought this might have been a singularity.
No, I live as if all guns are loaded.
Hello! Don't cock the hammer.
Every church that is a brick and mortar is of satanic value.
There are over 400,000 textual variants. Are you suggesting that out of all of those textual variants, you have something that's perfect?
Yes, it's the infallible Word of God.
I believe there is a God, of course. I don't follow any particular religion, but there has to be a God up there, I think.
Is his name George or Vivian?
George or Vivian?
Yeah, which one? We're voting on this.
Of the two, probably George.
George? Okay. Got a George. That's one for George. Do you ever sense a presence?
I can say I have, not at a moment of inspiration, actually a moment when I almost got in a motorcycle accident.
Jesus, take the wheel.
Yeah, I was about to cross over a yellow line. I looked once, no cars were coming, then something told me to look, and there was a truck barreling down the road. But I slammed on the brakes and I said to myself, I'm dead right here. And somehow I stopped right in the middle of the road. The truck passed me right where you're standing.
All right. Thanks, George.
Right here, even from a young age, we know what is right and wrong. We know exactly what's right and wrong.
In Romans chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "To kauthentis unic pisteos," correct?
Sir, speak English. Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. If you want to have true help in the Word of God, come to me and I'll help you. Okay, the original transcript was in Latin and Hebrew.
No. Okay, no. Paul spoke in Greek.
Okay, in Greek.
Paul
Okay,
spoke "De kauthentis
originally-
unic pisteos."
It derived originally.
What does it mean?
Why can't they heal you in these churches, and why are they overrun by sicknesses? Because they went to the witch, which is pharma. Pharmaceutical is the witch. It started in Greek, and it started in Hebrew, and it started in Latin, but it has been translated to English. Pharmaceutical is the witch. You
You're
can argue
speaking
with
things that are spurious.
Sir, you better believe I'm speaking the truth. You are of doubt. You are of wickedness. You have willful sins. That's why you have no understanding, because you have not let go of your willful sins. There's two different kinds of sins in life. There's a willful one and there's an ignorant one, and you're living in an ignorant one. That's why you have no grace. Right here, even from a young age, we know what is right and wrong. We know exactly what's right and wrong, because even a child knows when he's done wrong. He knows when he's lied. He knows when he's stolen. Hebrews 10:26 says, if you continue to do a willful sin, the blood of Jesus Christ doesn't cover that sin no more, and you have no coverage of sins. Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
That was rather weird, huh? Let's move on.
Hey, you still got the best microphone. I don't understand this. Let's go look at some water.
If you want to have true help in the Word of God, come to me and I'll help you.
Okay. You didn't start that fight a while ago, right?
No, I didn't start that fight. No. I was
Okay.
just there, bystander.
Okay, you were walking up behind what was going on. What did you hear?
I actually didn't hear anything. I just I could see that there was some hostility coming from the other guy, and started making my way towards you, and then got curious on what you guys were doing. So my whole family is, they're very religious, but I know that there's something, but I'm not going to label it. That's just how I feel. I know that there's something stronger than me. I know there's something that put us here, higher power, but I'm not going to put a label on it. I'm not going to call it what. That's just how I feel.
All right, this is Joey and Dr. Jones again, standing at what I'm told is the center of time and space. I just tried to turn those hands back. Nothing happened, trying to change my childhood and take away the pain. What do you think? Joey and Dr. Jones standing here once again. We have found a fork in the road. We have several options to take. We have one straight, one's right, but it says we can only go left. What do you think about this? Being forced to make a choice.
I think
at
we
a
need
singular
to go,
moment.
Okay, we need to go straight.
Straight. It says you can't do it. It says only left.
That's on that side of the line.
Right, and that's where you are.
That's true.
Yeah. Bye.
That's true. Yeah. We have a long way to go. We are on this journey. It's very much in flux. We need a lot of people to get involved, simply because it's almost like being in group therapy. I mean, we are good for each other. Humanity is good for each other.
Absolutely.
We need to look to each other, turn to each other instead of away from each other. And so what are your thoughts on trying to stop this narrative of againstness that's going on in politics?
we definitely won't make any difference if we don't change our attitudes and if we don't grow up as people ourselves and learn to reach and touch people in a positive way. What it means to do that, how it affects others, why it can be difficult to maintain a positive attitude in a society that is now politically and racially charged. Somebody who's treating you poorly, they're probably doing that out of nothing that has anything to do with you.
Right.
And if you can be different and be better and be more positive, well, that's going to challenge how they feel they need to act. It's going to make them think about it, even if it's not in that moment.
Okay, let's talk about that gentleman for a few minutes, or just a second or two. That guy.
He never told us his name. He did give us his phone number, though.
Right.
Yeah. If you want some cheer and some encouragement, you can call that guy's phone number, and he will lift your spirits.
Okay, but could you not tell that he has this need, this desire to be heard?
Sure.
I mean, he wants to put it out there.
Yeah.
But it's
Somebody
very
has
much
really
a
hurt
one-way
that guy.
street. Yeah. And so, I mean, he needs therapy, and I'm convinced that we can be out here on the streets talking with people, giving them an ear, respecting them, and not that we're not going to challenge them, but we can do it in a manner that would improve their lives. And that's what I would like to do. And so I really don't care whether a person's a theist, atheist, or an agnostic. What matters to me is that we reach out to each other and learn how to be friends.
Sure.
And build meaningful community together.
Yeah. That guy is he sits in an enormous group of people in this world that have probably completely forgotten what it was like to be a child, to be somebody who wanted to explore, who was curious about themselves and others, and boy, he's been badly hurt by probably not just one person, but and now he believes that the way to, I guess, what he's calling goodness is by screaming at people and making sure that they believe exactly what he believes.
Right. But people are being radicalized on the left and the right in theism and atheism and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And there's something about that isn't doing anyone any good. And so we've got to take an approach that would bring peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
Good words.
Well, I've enjoyed this evening.
Yeah, me too.
Fun. Love you.
Love you too. By the way, this is our Pensacola's public urinal, and I don't know, you might want to cut that out.
You first.
No, sir.
Yes, we are starting the show tonight that is in a different way. I want to share a couple of things with you because this has been a difficult year for us, to say the least. Some of you guys know that we lost early on, just before summer. We suffered the loss of our youngest son. That's extremely difficult to process. After that, it was about a month that my wife, she contracted COVID. I did as well, and my mother did as well, and she's in her 90s. And that was extremely difficult, and I can't encourage people enough to get healthy, because the healthier that you are, the better off you are during the entire time that you have COVID. But it wasn't like that was the only thing on our plate. I mean, my mother has, here in the South, we call it dementia. And this was difficult for her, and wow, the experience that we had with her trying to, number one, get her to survive, working with all the doctors, all the therapists and all of that. I mean, these people were brilliant. My father-in-law, just right after we recovered, he started having difficulties and was placed into the hospital just this month, and then the next month, and then the next month, and the stay became longer and longer and longer. And, you know, when you get up in age, you know, you have to move. He was in ICU for many days. He was placed in just different spots. I'm going to call them spots in the hospital because I do not believe that they did a good job. Not at all. I'm angry. But to make a long story short, they sent him home, put him in hospice, and yes, just I don't know the days, just seems like just a few minutes ago, but he too passed. And we're talking about someone who would come to the studio all the time and sing. And to hear his voice again in the microphone, I mean, singing old school country songs, wow, I can't brag enough about that. And so we're trying to process that and take care of my mother and take care of all of the things that we do. And Daryl and Terry and Steve, they've been so kind just to keep the shows going. I've taken very much a back seat, realizing that these guys are just wonderful. I don't have to worry about what they say because they have ethics. They're all compassionate. They're smart. They know how to get at this and that. And there's one thing that I like about all of them. All of them have this country feel. In other words, Terry, he's always putting these little videos, and I'm always watching him. And it's just out in his yard. I mean, he's the guy that knows how to hunt. He does things that I really resonate with. The same thing is true of Steve. I mean, this guy, he's a genius. And Daryl, I mean, if there's ever been a man who's Mr. Kindness, Mr. Patience, the guy who will listen, it's Daryl. And I need to take just a moment and just hesitate for a second because I want to make sure that I sent Daryl the right link. But I want to share something before they start that is in their conversation tonight. My mother, just a handful of days ago, and it's difficult. You know, you live in this fog when you're going through this. She fell. And I was bringing in milkshakes. She loves to drink a milkshake. I mean, wow, that's like manna from heaven to her. And she loves to eat hamburgers and all of that, right? But I think this was an Arby's order, so it was some particular kind of sandwich, if you will, but the milkshake was the most important thing. And so I walked by her wheelchair, and she's supposed to stay in her wheelchair until assisted, that is, in walking. And she was so excited about the milkshake. I mean, the milkshake was, wow, I've got to get to it. And I didn't know what she was doing because that was behind my back. I was walking in to our home, and I was trying to put everything that is where we like to eat and watch television. And when I put the milkshakes down, I heard this noise, and then I heard her cry. She was crying out, "Michael, help." And by the time that I got to her, it was like she couldn't see me, and she was looking through me into the distance, and she just kept crying. And there was this huge pool of blood that her head was lying in. And that's something that I didn't need to see, because instantly my wife had to help me because I lost it. My little brother at the age of 2 on his birthday. My parents would always take a nap in the afternoon. My father was a pastor, and he had that luxury of doing that. But my 2 younger brothers, they were there at the house, and my parents said, "Hey, you guys need to lay down." And so they put them to bed so they would take a nap. And so my mom and dad, they went into their room, left their door open, only to lay down to hear a crash. And my youngest brother, who was 2, it was his birthday. They went in to look, that is, at the fish in the fish tank. I was walking home from school at this time, but my youngest brother pulled on the fish tank, and it broke, and my little brother fell into the glass, and it severed his head. And my father and mother jumped up, and my father put the head back on, and my mother grabbed my little brother, and they tried to save him. They rushed to the hospital, and my other brother tried to save him when he was falling, and his wrists were cut up. He almost died as well. I walked in just minutes after it happened, and fish were flopping all over the floor. But that pool of blood was so similar to what I saw just a few days ago. And so it hit me strong. I mean, it was a gut punch. I didn't know how to handle it, except I knew that my wife could, and she was on the phone to EMS. They got here, and I'd like to say, and I don't say this to disparage anyone, but these were the most incompetent people. And I was frightened because these individuals didn't know what they were doing. And they rushed her to the emergency room, only to get to the emergency room and have an ER doctor that would only listen to her. They kept me outside of the emergency room, and they're listening to a dementia patient stating to them what's wrong. And so they're doing the test, and then they finally, that is the hospital, let me back there. And so they're already doing the test after listening to my mother. Well, my mother, sometimes when she's looking at the toilet, when we take her to the toilet, she thinks that's a race car. And so you can imagine, what they heard. They only took a CAT scan of her head. Now we're talking about someone in her 90s, and she falls, and she has, a knot on her head about 1.5 inches tall, and blood everywhere, and huge gash, and she's had brain surgery, and so she's been through, lots of trauma. But this emergency room doctor, and I hesitate simply because would not check the rest of her body. She's screaming in pain. When I get in there, I'm holding her right hand, the nurse is holding her left hand, and the physician's assistant is saying, I'm so sorry, she's on so much pain, I don't know what to do. I said, painkiller, that works mighty fine. And they get a hold of the doctor. The doctor said, give her some Tylenol. And I lost it. I said, no. I mean, this, I can go to Walmart to get Tylenol. What's going on? And, this guy was just in another world. I don't know whether he was on drugs or what, but he was just so uncaring. And wow, I didn't need that. This, my wife and I, we live as if our loved ones are our everything, okay? That's the way that we live. And so there she is screaming out in pain, and the doctor wants to give her a Tylenol. He finally concedes and gives her pain medication that actually works, and then the physician's assistant starts stapling up her head, and I'm asking, why isn't the rest of the body being dealt with? Because she's got all kinds of pain and bruises, and I mean, it was a nightmare. Oh, she'll be all right. And so he said, just give her some Tylenol. And I said, I can't believe you're saying just give her some Tylenol. Well, anything more than that, she's just going to get dizzy and fall again. I said, she's in a wheelchair. And she only walks assisted. She just happened to get up unassisted on her own, and we're putting a stop to that. I mean, she's in pain. And so he said, okay, I'll write a prescription. And so he writes this prescription for her pain. I didn't even look at it. Should have. I took it to the pharmacy because she was in a lot of pain. And they looked at me and they laughed. They said, hey, it's going to take us at least 2 to 3 weeks to get this medication in. And I'm going, do what? And they said, did you read it? And I read it. They said, this is a medication that maybe a mom and pop shop somewhere might have. And one of the pharmacists came up to me and said, I'm sorry, this guy, he just did this to piss you off. And so my question tonight isn't so much about Rittenhouse. My question is, what's going on within our hospitals, within our healthcare system? In other words, when you make an emergency call and you have people who are being hired here in Pensacola, and we've investigated a little bit of this here lately. I mean, we're talking about extremely incompetent people who are working as EMTs. We're talking about people who don't give a damn in ER. We're talking about people who just don't care for the elderly. That was true when my father-in-law was in the hospital. They said, oh, we can't do physical therapy. And, when you're laying on your back and, you're in your 80s and you lay there for about 20 days and you don't move, you need someone who would say, you don't need just respiratory therapy, but you need physical therapy so you can keep everything moving. And then they tell you you'll never move again. I mean, something is really, really wrong. And we're not doing a show on this, but I had to just let it out. It's therapy for me. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to these guys, because these guys know how to turn water into wine, and they're very good. But I wanted to tell all of you guys how much I appreciate the work that these gentlemen have done while I've been basically in the fog. I mean, I've literally been just in a fog. The COVID fog was bad. I mean, a literal fog. But with all these different happenings going on, I mean, it's been tough. But when you have people like Daryl in your life, wow. When you have people like Steve and Terry, they're going to be there for you. Being ever so patient, understanding, kind, that means a lot. And so I hope that you too have good people in your lives, because that really helps you to make it another day. And so enough about that. I think the topic tonight is Rittenhouse. They're going to take off on it. And so, guys, know that I love you so much, and I appreciate everything that you've done for my wife and me and my family. I mean, you guys are just too awesome, better than Jesus. Yeah. You know my heart. And so thank you over and over again. Take off on it.
Well, I'm the latest arrival, so I'll just say a little something before we get started. I have been trying to keep up with that trial, so I'm looking forward to a conversation about that. But I just want to say that, we show up here as often as we can. We have normal times of Monday night and Thursday night, and then we do a little something on Sunday morning. And honestly, I don't know how many people hear us, how many people enjoy what we have to say. I hope there's many. This is, for me, a great highlight, because, I live my life a certain way, and I work to provide an income. I've got a large family. I've got a wonderful wife, just many things that I'm involved in. But at the core for me is I've always wanted to make a difference. I've always wanted to be a benefit, not to as many people as I can. That's the only way I know to put it. I could say to the world, but I mean, how many people really speak and say something and change the world? That doesn't happen every day. But I just want to do my part, and I speak to individuals constantly and try to share things that would help. But on this platform, we have an opportunity to reach a lot of people. And so the goal for me is just to share something that I see that has benefited me so much, in the hopes that it would have the same effect on others. And so that's my little intro, and I'll turn it over to someone who wants to get things going here.
Well, Dr. Jones, I'll jump in real quick. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry to hear all of that. I mean, the detail that you gave there was some of the stuff I wasn't aware of, obviously, but I've noticed the same thing. I do, and I will connect this over, because I've noticed the same thing. I watched a couple years ago, my grandfather passed after suffering a long and painful, essentially drowned slowly over time with COPD after quadruple bypass, multiple. He was held together with duct tape and chewing gum by the end. And my both of my grandmothers now dealing with dementia. One is in late stage Alzheimer's, full blown, and she's essentially, she doesn't remember. I mean, any of us, anything about us, and just she's living but not. And my other is in the early stages, we suspect, because she's showing all the same symptoms that my other grandmother did early on in hers. And I feel consistently as if I know more about healthcare than the people that will be talking to us about their healthcare. And in an overarching sense, I think that it is a soul sickness that is permeated throughout our entire society that is also reflected in the Rittenhouse trial. Because I've been watching this for the last couple of weeks, and I can't describe the levels of frustration that I feel watching this, seeing prosecuting attorneys that seem to know absolutely nothing about law in the United States of America. Or if they do, they're willfully pretending as if they don't in order to railroad a kid. I feel like, but it's beyond just malpractice. And it's beyond, in my opinion, beyond the point where the judge should have thrown this trial out with mistrial with prejudice and just be done with it, because it's so blatantly obvious that they're breaking all rules and norms of the legal system in order to achieve a political end. That we are in a situation where our professions, and it seems to be most specifically the professions that are deeply tied in with government oversight and bureaucracy, have been corrupted to the point to where the people that work within them hate their fellow man, to where they feel, and that might be being a little bit too, but they've become jaded or nihilistic about our entire society, our entire, and by extension, the fellow men, the people that they're supposed to be working with and protecting and serving. Sorry. But and it couldn't have been in any more stark display tonight. And I was watching I watched the beginning of the day when the hopefully soon to be disbarred prosecutor Binger was making his case, making his closing arguments, and then I only came back. Give me just 1 second. I had actually kind of tuned out in the afternoon because I didn't think that the defense really had much heavy lifting to do. I think this case is going to essentially be decided based upon how intimidated the jury feels to come to the right conclusion. I think it's plain as day to anybody watching it what's going on here. Well, and I shouldn't say that. I'll get back to that in a little while, maybe after Terry speaks. But But I went in there and I watched the defense, and the defense presented as good of a case, as strong of a day as he has had in this entire case. And he laid out their closing arguments very, very strongly, and played it very well, and told the truth, and presented the evidence and presented the facts of the case as objectively as one could reasonably be expected to do so. And then he obviously got under the skin of the prosecution, because when the defense came up for their rebuttal to his closing, it was the secondary attorney, not the one that's, not Binger, not the one that's been trying most of the case. And it was the most petulant display of corruption that I believe I've ever witnessed in real time. And I could not, I honestly, I was torn between thinking that the defense attorney should be objecting to every single lie that was coming out of his mouth and allowing him to do it, because it could not have been playing well with the jury. He was just standing there yelling at the jury, essentially, and getting upset about a blog site that was critical of, they seemed to be more upset that people were critical of their office than that they were trying to achieve justice in the courtroom. And I believe that, we've seen a degradation of all of our professional fields that are overseen in this way. Like things, legal argumentation and legal logic that would not have passed muster for a Law and Order script 10 years ago. That writers in Hollywood could have written a better understanding of law 10 years ago than our practicing lawyers today seem to have of law. And it baffles me, because I'm like, does nobody else remember this? Like, is it really that far gone? Like, several years ago that we had critical thinking skills strong enough to understand the logical auspices for what is supposed to be happening in a courtroom in the United States. That I'm just utterly disgusted that, and honestly, and I will say this, I will say that, I haven't met a single person in person that doesn't feel exactly the same way I do about it. But to watch the way that the media portrays it, and to watch the way that all of the social media platforms are portraying it, now that they have curated out anyone without a dissenting opinion, or silenced as many people as they possibly can that speak out against the establishment narratives, I cannot believe that there's that many people out there that still see the other movie in the Akira Kurosawa sense of one screen, two films, that it just, I don't know. I'm becoming concerned that we're reaching a point where there is no common ground to be found between the people who are able to see the truth and the people who are willfully blinding themselves to it. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Terry?
You made some good points. I'd like to do two things. I'd like to, one thing I really wonder why somebody gave it the thumbs down before we ever even opened up the video. So perhaps just bringing up the name of the evil Rittenhouse was enough to do it. And rather than reiterate on what you've said, Steve, and I agree with what you've said, I just would like to do two other things if I could. One of them is, and it's sort of like I walked, a friend had said something, and you saw, I sent to you that text from another friend of mine who I met through a gardening group, and we've shared nothing but good text back and forth and how to make food and stuff, and everything's fine. And what they were looking at to derive what they said had to be something not unlike what the prosecuting attorney was doing. Is just, now that we've been presented with, and this thing was shot from a whole bunch of different angles. And you, like me, watch things like Crowder. You saw better video on Crowder than you saw in the courtroom. And they're going, what the heck? The one guy, the Mexican American, or whatever we're supposed to call people these days. I don't know what I'm
Drew Hernandez.
Yeah, Drew Hernandez did an excellent job of filming things, and he did an excellent job. He was very articulate in court, and they tried to make him sound like a fly-by-night loony just because he was actually sounding articulate in court. And he's unflappable. And this guy recently inserted himself into the cartels in Mexico. He's been through some pretty hairy stuff. So that street that night was nothing unique for him. And he was doing his best to just walk along and blend in, along with Eliza Schaefer, who was out there as well. And both of them spoke to, of course, nobody knew who Rittenhouse was until something happened. But, both of them had spoken with Rittenhouse that evening. And I see it as kind of a community coming together saying, no, we're not going to burn the place down. And they keep trying to make it sound he's 20 miles away, about the same distance I had to drive to go to work because I live in the country. And I crossed the county line. And when I'm across the county line, what am I doing in another county? Well, I should add too, by the way, just right up front before I say anything else. By the way, I was going to take down the air rifle on top of the piano, and I left it because it's my piano, it's my air rifle, and you're not here. And it doesn't shoot itself. But you spoke to something about details, and Dr. Jones was speaking about the details, or the lack thereof, that the medical professionals were exhibiting. And I, for a long time, have thought this 70% passing stuff is a bunch of hooey, and that's a technical term, by the way. If you can pass a test at 71 or 75%, that means you've got a 25% deficit traveling ahead from there. You're likely going to forget the 71 or 75% that you knew, at least some degree. When I went and got my COVID shots, I was just chatting with the people there about some of the things I learned reading, because I'm a captive, but I'm never silent because, if I don't have to be. So these people are asking stuff. So I asked a few questions of the nurses who were going about the thing and the waiting period I had to spend for that. And I found out that they were just really light on information, and they were nice people. They've got a job to do, but it's kind of like, asking the person from McDonald's where they source their beef. They're probably not going to do that. They might be able to get the bun with the special sauce and stuff put together for you, but they probably don't know where they access the beef. They don't know, where they farm the wheat for the buns, etc. So I thought I'd do one thing here, because I know people don't know this. And yes, I took out a show and tell here, but and I was going to also mention just one thing in passing. I sent a picture to Dr. Jones. Hopefully he'll notice that and maybe consider popping it up. It's me standing on the Skyway between Metro State University and Metro State University Library, which is very key to something I wanted to talk about. This is the same, but it's different type thing. I was an expert electrician. I was very good at what I did because I did places like that, high profile, super high profile job. I was the foreman on the job. And they put that skyway across, and they dug some footings for the skyway, and in digging the footings, they hit, and this is Metro State University, covers a couple city blocks. They're up and running, and when they're digging the footings for the skyway, which had nothing to do with me, they hit a feed from the main power building to the big tall building that if you look up Metro State University in St. Paul, you'll see the big building. That was the building that was that had the main source of power, and it went to the one that they were interrupted the feed to. It was quadruple parallel feeds for the main, big power. Took 4 pipes and full of wires just to carry the power from one building to the next. They cut two of the pipes. In cutting 2 of the pipes, they of course destroyed the wire, and in destroying the wire, it got their attention. But what didn't happen, and there's a ground fault interrupter breaker, big, expensive thing. Fills a whole cabinet about twice the size of a refrigerator. The ground fault interrupter breaker didn't go off. So I went in there and and all they knew is that some of the power was off. When you've got three-phase power and some of the power's off, you've got multiple dangers out there. You know, nothing three-phase, no motors are going to run. Yet some of the lights were on, leaving the people with the impression they had power. I walked in there, I saw that the wires were cut. I couldn't do anything without killing the power to the whole thing. Then I also realized the breaker hadn't gone, and I walked in there and I walked out and I said, somebody spot me on this in case something goes wrong, because I didn't know what was going to happen when I killed the power. Well, I killed the power and I shut down the whole school. Ever try shutting a university down without telling anybody about it? You know how popular I became? You have any idea what I had to say, what I had to answer to? Can you even imagine what I had to answer to for the next year for doing that? And it was the right thing to do. And it at least saved components to the building, if not lives. And it was undisputably the right thing to do by everybody. But everybody that knew nothing had an idea what I should have done instead. And I absolutely did the right thing. And I also sung like a choking sparrow, trying to make sure that something we did right away. And I got the right people out there. I eliminated the 2 feeds that were dropped. I brought the whole building back up within the day. I found what I needed to replace the damaged equipment from that. And I told them they needed to replace that ground fault breaker, that it was a hazard and it was going to come back to haunt them. Well, about 2 months later, the general foreman in charge, the guy who was over me on the thing, the guy that sat in the trailer all day long, I was the one that dealt with all the people on the field. Well, he took charge of replacing those feeds. And as they're pulling in, and I've talked to you guys about this, probably never said anything on the air about it, but he took charge of replacing those 2 feeds. And when he was replacing those, the guy who was dropping the thing away wasn't thinking. I wasn't even in the room. I was doing something else in a different building. Lots of buildings. It's a whole university that pertain to what we were doing as well. School wasn't occupied, fortunately. And the guy who was in the equipment put a phase to ground, a C phase to ground, short, dead short, which is enough to cause it to go plasma. And he had a plasma explosion in the cabinet. And the plasma explosion started a plasma arc, which continued for about 6 to 8 seconds. It depends on who you talk to. I heard it 2 buildings away through multiple concrete walls. I heard the explosion. So I got Denny, who was in the building affected, on the radio, and we both took off running. And even though I was older and bigger, I beat him there because we figured we were going to go in and find dead people. There was 3 people in the room when this happened. 2 of them got blown out 2 separate doors. The guy who was in the cabinet got blown sideways, and he was unconscious. One of them was dazed, and the other one just barely got outside, and the room was full of plasma smoke. So, by the way, this is all because they didn't replace that ground fault main first. So I went in there. I dragged 2 people out of the plasma fog. The damage to my lungs today is because I did that. I saved their life. But again, that doesn't matter. You have no idea how many meetings we had to go to and how many times I had to tell the story over and over and over and over again to people who didn't even understand what we were talking about, because most people don't know what plasma is. So it just was one of those things that, you sit there and you see the first thing to play as soon as they realize no one's dead is start playing the litigious card. By the way, we spent nonstop in there to get the thing back up and running. We got the people who built the gear out of bed, and they went and built a piece of gear for us the same day. They came in there, measured everything up, built a piece of gear, put it together, but they lost we figured about 35 pounds of copper turned into less than air. And that's what plasma does. It deconstructs atoms. It's like the Klingon vaporizer. Deconstructs atoms. There's a lot to live through. And the whole thing is just one big cluster flop. It was caused by somebody not listening to the expert when he told them what to do after they made the first mistake, and I was the expert. So I don't necessarily put a lot of credence in myself, but when I know something about something, I do. And it just showed me, and if I didn't already believe that to begin with, this is 15 years ago. Yeah, a little bit more than 15 years ago, about 16 years ago. But it showed me just, it doesn't matter if you're right, it just matters how you're perceived. I didn't get in trouble, but man, somebody really wanted to hang someone for what went on in there. And so after that, I just thought I'd just do a little show and tell. They didn't show you this in court. This is there we go. This is a 223 cartridge. This is what the AR-15 shoots. It's an AR-15. It's not any other combination of letters. It's not an assault rifle. Assault rifles exist, but they are owned by the military. AR-15 is not an assault rifle. It's not an assault style rifle because we're not talking about high fashion here. There is no assault style rifle. It has a primer on the base. That's a little round thing in the middle. It has to be struck by a firing pin. When that's struck, this is the bullet, the little piece on the end. Even the defense attorney said it was steel. It's not steel. It's copper. Copper covered lead. And the cartridge here is the powder, or with powder, it's called powder, but it's actually more like rod that's been chopped up. Primer hits the cartridge, the firing pin hits the primer, ignites the powder, bullet pops out the end. It goes into, not a clip, magazine. Magazine. This isn't a high capacity 30 round magazine. It's a 30 round magazine because that's what the AR-15 uses. Does that help a little bit, maybe? You would think that before you took a kid to court for a trial, and I would have told Kyle to stay the bleep at home, you know. And if he could go back in time, I would duct tape him to his bed if I could, you know. I don't think that going to town mattered because the police had already drawn back and gone, let it go, let it burn. No, not that. I mean, I know it's hard to watch your town burn. I watched Minneapolis burn. I didn't like that at all. But I didn't go to Minneapolis because it was burning either. You know, there's a point where you go. And the other thing I just thought to show you the evil tool. This is an AR-15. We talked about pulling the bolt back. It's actually hard to do. This is how far you have to pull the bolt back.
Harry, can I ask you a quick question since you're home?
Yes.
Would you ever point that at someone?
I've never pointed that at anybody. Never in my life.
Did you notice that the prosecutor did that today? Did y'all see that?
They said that, but here, in the defense of the prosecutor, they proved that the gun was empty. It looked like this. The magazine, which goes in here, you know, like that. That's with it out. By the way, it doesn't load itself when you put it in there. You have to operate the bolt, you know, all the way through its cycle, which is lengthy. But this is and this is actually a friend's rifle. He leaves here. I don't own one myself, but I'm allowed to use it, which I don't, because what the heck. But the thing is that now that might have been scary for people that are instinctually scared when they see a rifle. It's just a rifle. But no, Daryl, absolutely, I would never point a gun at anybody. There's only one reason to point a gun at anything. That's, you know, as anything like a person or an animal or whatever, and that's to shoot it. And if you're not going to do that, then you shouldn't do that. But he held it up to his shoulder so that he could show, you know, what, and he actually had pretty good form when he was holding it. But, you know, there's something else that people do. And you see Kyle was doing this, by the way, since we're talking, finger like this. It's really awkward. But the reason people do that when you're on a range or something like that, people do this to prove that their finger's not on the trigger. It's up here. Safety's on the side, and the safety's on, by the way, for what it's worth. But you know, he's got his purple gloves on. You see his finger like this through, which, by the way, is really uncomfortable for me because I've hurt my hands enough times. I don't like doing that for no reason. I do when I'm holding anything, because I hold it like this. I just hold the grip. But this is easy to be confused that your finger could be on a trigger. This isn't. So that's what he's doing in most of what he sees. And again, I wouldn't have told him ever, especially as a 17-year-old. I would have never said, go ahead and take the gun anyway. You know, I mean, he was allowed to have and use the rifle in Wisconsin. It wasn't his technically yet, but he paid for it. And I'm not making excuses for him, but if we're gonna hang the kid, we should probably be honest about the details first. That way, when we hang him, we know what we're hanging him with. But and I don't envy him the situation he was in at all. But I'll leave it at that, mostly because I have to run and use my little room. I'll be back.
Well, you brought up a lot of good points, and I think that he really hit on a good one there with the idea that he did what needed to be done at his job, and for it he spent weeks and weeks and weeks getting questioned for doing the right thing. And the reason that you get questioned for doing the right thing is because the powers that be have to answer questions. If you do something that is unpopular, that causes complaints to come cycling in, they have to answer why things were done. And so it occurs to me that a lot of the problems that we have, a lot of our problems with communication, a lot of our problems with the declining service level of jobs, the jobs that we see in the professional field. I mean, I see this even in my industry. You know, I'm just in banking, and I see this in our customer service area. You know, your customer, and everybody complains about this. You get your customer service over the phone, and your customer service is garbage. It's one person trying to foist you off on another person who wants to foist you off on another person. Nobody really wants to answer your question, because that requires them taking some heat, because you're usually upset about something. So if they can really early on in the conversation get you off to somebody else so you can yell at them for a while, then they're willing to do that. And I think what it really boils down to, and this goes back, and we've talked about this and with critics of people that survived through totalitarian regimes previous to us, one of the things that they point out, whether it be Solzhenitsyn or Orwell or well, I mean, there's just so many of them. But one of the things they point out is that the loss of truth within people stop telling the truth. And now I don't want to misattribute the quote, but the quote that in a tyrannical time, I'm going to butcher it, but in a time of tyranny, to speak the truth, or at a time of universal deceit, to speak the truth is a revolutionary act. And we're rapidly coming to that. I'd say we're actually beyond it in our current society. And I think it boils down to a very, very base psychological problem, is that we don't want to have difficult conversations. Nobody wants to tell the mob, no, you're being stupid. Your complaints are not valid. Go the hell home. And if you did, they wouldn't have been there. And then the police would not be standing down, and the citizens of the town would not be feeling the need to go out and protect their town. And so what essentially this entire case is boiled down to is us sincerely making the "she shouldn't have been dressed like that" argument to crucify this kid, where where people for years and years and years have tried to use the ridiculous argument, well, she was dressed provocatively and walking outside at night. Well, does that mean she should get raped? No, absolutely not. but it's risk assessment, and you shouldn't do it because you should know that that's a dangerous situation that you're putting yourself in. And now we're making that exact same argument because it is a fairly common sense argument. If you don't put yourself in a dangerous situation, dangerous stuff is not going to happen. But you cannot apply that argument to Kyle without applying that argument to the rioters who had no business being out there doing what they were doing. And if they were not out there, there was many other nights, 17 years worth of nights of the kid's life up to that point that he had not been out there walking around downtown with a rifle. He was only there because the rioters were there. So if you're saying he shouldn't have been there, well, then they shouldn't have been there. And so if you're saying everything being equal, which is what we're supposed to do under the law, the way that we interpret the law as putting forth equality under equality under the law is the utmost principle, then once you get past the point, well, if we're going to make the argument that he shouldn't have been there, well, then we have to make the argument they shouldn't have been there. Or if we want to make the argument he shouldn't have been armed, well, then we have to make the argument, well, they also shouldn't have been armed. And so when you go through and you start ticking off the boxes and taking away, well, this thing applies to him, but it also applies to them. This applies to him, but it also applies to them. And you go down there, you get down to the final one, which is there were many people there that night. There were many people there that night that verbally attacked him. There were many people there that night. There were several other people there that night that hit him that did not get shot. And even the people that attacked him that got shot, he gave multiple opportunities to stop attacking him before he shot them. The only people there that were attacking without provocation were the people that were attacking him. He defended himself in the same way that anybody would be taught to do so in any self-defense class, in any shooting class that you ever go to. You shoot to stop. You don't shoot to kill, you shoot to stop. And so that means you shoot for center mass. And it's exactly what he did. And even in the one situation where he shot the center mass, missed and hit the guy's arm, and the guy immediately, he could tell that he was disabled, he stopped. He did not continue shooting. When you apply the principles equally across the board, he couldn't have handled himself any better in a bad situation than what he did. It's clear as day, based on the facts of the case, and this is not being biased. Like I don't know the kid. He's not a part of any political organization or group or anything. I don't have a political bias toward him. But what I do see is two things. Being the outcome of this, first of all, this is the right to self-defense is on trial. The right to self-defense in the United States is on trial here. Because if he could not defend himself in the situation that he found himself in, then none of us can defend ourselves against anything. And secondly, and more insidiously, in my opinion, is, and I actually disagree a little bit with what Terry was saying earlier, but I don't think he meant it in this way. But in the way that he stated it, I think this is the insidious manner of this lesson, is that it gets people to say it because it is common sense. It is common sense to say, I would have told him, the town's lost. It's stupid. Don't go out there and put yourself in that situation. But that's the point, is if our means of protection under the law, the police, can be corrupted to the point they can just be told to stand down and not protect the city, not do their jobs, and stop crime, then the last line of defense are the people. And if you intimidate the people, or if you quell the spirit of the people to protect their own towns, is that really the spirit that we want to quell? Like, take it out of the guise of BLM riots or Antifa or just any kind of political, any kind of political ideological rioting in the streets here by Americans, what would we do if we were invaded? I mean, should we not value our homes? Should we not want to protect the places where our children live and grow up? What makes me the most angry, and the people that I find myself the angriest at, is not Kyle, but it's the men of Kenosha that didn't stand up and do what they should have done and protect that area when the police decided they weren't going to. Because if the men had been doing it, then boys wouldn't have been out there doing it.
You brought up something that I see in the big picture, is the best way I know how to put it. It seems like, when I watch so much of what's going on in this country, and especially with this administration and those that are in place in authority right now, there's no way that I could conceive of people being that dumb, people being that stupid. And I'm using those terms very directly. I mean, when someone is dumb, that just means they don't know what they're doing. If they're stupid, they're just too dumb to know what they're doing. I guess I'm just saying that's the way I'm using the terminology. These people that are making so many of the decisions, and that, when you look at this trial and the point it has come to, that it's even a trial at all in the first place, it's as if, okay, we're going to push and we're going to push and we're going to keep pushing to see how far people will be pushed. See if we can shove them into this submission that we're looking for across the board. And I see people being tested. We, as American citizens, I'm just going to say it that way, are being tested. What will we allow? How far will we let people shove us? And this kid, in some ways, to me, represents, what you were just saying. Where are the men? Where are the people that are standing up to this and saying, no, we're not going to just watch this happen. And I'm talking about in every category, because I think it even relates to what we're seeing in the medical field. I have this suspicion, and I think it's a little more than a suspicion. It's just things you hear from different sources, and it is hard to know what to believe because of all this disinformation, which I think mostly is coming from the top and not the bottom. But the pressure that's being applied to hospitals, to people that in associated with the medical field, doctors, they swear an oath, from what I understand. And of course, before someone testifies in court, they put their hand on the Bible and swear. I don't think it means much anymore, if maybe it ever really has. But I have seen strong commitment from the medical field. It's an area where it seems like to even be able to do some of the things those people do, they get paid pretty good. I mean, better than a lot of us. But for the responsibility that they take upon themselves, I don't think it's kind of like policing. Why would you do it? Why would anybody want to do it? So you can carry a gun and look tough? No. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. You sure wouldn't want to do that if you were going to wear a badge, just join a gang, just be a part of the cartel. But to go out there and defend people, in other words, what I'm trying to say is, in order to be in these professions, I think you really have to care. But that doesn't mean that when the pressure is applied to you, it doesn't define how you're going to respond to it. And I think some just maybe are pushed to the point that they don't care. Others are pushed to the point that they're afraid to do the right thing in some cases. You know, even when I think about all this COVID deaths, I wonder how many of them were preventable at the medical level. You know, who were they listening to? Who was, you know, I've heard Terry talking about when he was drowning in his own fluids. And it's like they didn't know what to do. And how many of these early COVID deaths were at the mercy of ventilators? People were drowning the same way that Terry was. You know, I don't know much of anything medically, but that's one thing that I've heard repeatedly. You can't survive on your back in those circumstances, and that's where all these people died. And were they really that bad off, or did they get that bad after they were put in that position? There's just so many questions about this, and who was calling the shots? You know, we've lived a long time in this country without being threatened to not do what we're trained to do. But it seems like we have a lot of that going on these days, just like right now in this trial. I mean, to me, this is a prime example. What's going to happen? You got, 12 jurors that have got to make a decision. It's a simple one. It's easy. It's obvious. Self-defense. But what are they being threatened with personally? And ones that are just waiting to start burning again if the results don't satisfy them. And I guess my question, the bottom line is, how many of us are going to stand up and say no? How many of us are going to say this is enough? And what does that even mean? What is it? We've never been in this place as I see it.
Real quick, Terry, I wanted to say something real quick to touch on that, and I'll try to keep it real short. I think a lot of people have got a bitter pill they need to just go ahead and get out of the way and swallow. Because when you brought up the point about disinformation or misinformation, and it's one thing whenever two ideologically opposed sides are arguing about the facts in the middle, and they're putting their own spin on it. People have talked about this for years and years and years in regards to, say, Fox News versus MSNBC. You know, Fox News was always going to give the Republican spin, and MSNBC was a very overtly Democratic spin. And so it was seen as if they were the opposing sides of the coin. But the problem with that thought process is they're agreeing on the premises. More often than not, they're agreeing on the premises. They're only fighting about downstream facts about the case that are meant to divide us on questions that are not substantive. So we're fighting from one side of the aisle, and the other's fighting from the other side of the aisle about inconsequential crap regarding the stories that they're telling. If you go further upstream in their logical process, or where the story begins, and you say, wait a minute, was this even true at all? Then it comes to where, wait a minute, we've got a lot of things we actually agree on, but we're being sold a narrative that's then split into two, and we're given the scraps to fight on. And each one, you know, they throw one bone to one side and the other bone to the other side and let us fight over them. But throughout the last several years, I think it was thrown into stark contrast with the Trump administration, starting with the Russiagate through to Ukraine Gate, through to COVID information, the Covington Cross kids, and now we're getting into this Rittenhouse situation. The people that were said to be spreading misinformation and disinformation early on have been vindicated 100% of the time. As the facts came out, or I shouldn't say came out because they were presenting the facts early on, but then they got called misinformation, disinformation. It took a lot of time for those facts to go through the process before everybody slowly came to realize, oh, wait a minute, this was right. I knew the facts of this, all this stuff that people, I mean, and we've all seen the craziness. I see people still spouting out. There's people saying that he was out there shot like 60 rounds. There's people out there saying that he shot 3 black men. There's people out there saying that they're still saying that he crossed state lines with the gun. All of which are not borne out by the basic facts of the case that are agreed upon by both sides of the defense and the prosecution. I knew this a year ago. People that pay attention to those sources that are called misinformation, disinformation, and it goes back to that thing I was talking about with the uncomfortable conversations, with you hearing things you don't want to hear. And this is when you brought him up earlier, and that's the only reason I'm bringing it in here. But Steven Crowder was showing these videos a year ago, right at the time that this was happening, in context, presenting them in context to show what was happening. And he's vilified and hated. I remember it was several weeks ago when he was in the hospital and his lung collapsed, and he put out an Instagram thing saying that he almost died the previous night. Right at that same time, oh God, what's his name? I like the actor, but I can't think of his name right now. But one of the actors from Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, he had a severe heart attack right there at the same time, and people were talking about, I wish they would trade. I wish, oh man, what is his name? Anyway, if only we could trade him for Steven Crowder. Let's save this one and let that one go. You know, he's hated because he does those uncomfortable conversations. His claim to fame is the change my mind appearances, where he goes out to places and he just sits down and has conversations with people about controversial subjects. He's hated because he tries to talk about uncomfortable subjects. And it's all what we're talking about today. We, as a society, have become terrified of having hard conversations, of telling people truths that they don't want to hear. But it is a bitter pill to swallow, but you need to it's time to catch up. Your mainstream sources that you've considered credible for decades are not. They're lying to you about everything.
On what you're saying there, Steve, and I wasn't trying to be dramatic or something by holding up an AR-15 and showing magazine and cartridge. I was trying to inform people who might see this, later now, because what I said there is obviously not known by most people that exist in the world. And certainly by a lot of people in the country. There's a lot of kids, and I mean kids, I mean really kids, 12-year-olds are going out to their country place or shooting range with their parents, and they're shooting AR-15s with proper eye protection and earmuffs on, and they're pointing the gun in the right direction, and they're learning how to clear a jam or whatever, and they're learning how the mechanics of it work. It's like if you wanted to drive a car, it'd be a good idea to know how it works before you just turn it on and flip that thing that goes somewhere, and then just see what happens next. It's a good idea to go through the mechanics of it, but cars are made to be user friendly. The AR-15 is made to be stuck in the hands of 20-year-olds and sent off to war, and they can just go ahead and, well, not the AR-15. Oh God, I'm going to step in it here. The M4, which the AR-15 is largely resembles physically, it is made to be handed to people. It's got space inside, so you can drop it in the mud and it still works, kind of. You know, they learn how to, it's real simple pivot on there. You can open it up, you can clear a barrel, you can do all sorts of things. You can break it down really quickly and put it back together really quickly. And that's what military arms are known for. And somebody just went, hey, why don't we start using this for hunting hogs, which are feral hogs, which in some areas of the country are really a problem, both for other livestock and fields and for even for people out walking in the woods. So people started to use it more in hunting, and it became more popular for things like that. Still, you know, not considered a really good cartridge for deer, even though that's just what people say. I mean, it's a 55 grain bullet. If you want to look up what grains means, you can look it up in your own time. It's a 55 grain bullet that travels on the average. There's variance there. Travels between 32 and 3,400 feet per second. Again, somewhere in there. Depends on which cartridge, which manufacturer's loading it, or to load them yourself, which is pretty darn fast. So when they say that the full, when the prosecutor was saying the full metal jacket is designed to shoot through people, it's not designed to shoot through people. It's designed to shoot through things. And I thought, I mean, I really didn't appreciate, but again, I've talked to people who are neophytes when it comes to the firearms they own. Kyle didn't know if he had hollow points or full metal jacket in there. Well, the thing of it is a hollow point is made to open up with an extreme amount of stress. And the hollow point will still shoot through person A into person B. I was thinking about this earlier today before the show, and I remember a guy that I worked with who shot a 7mm Weatherby, which is really, really hot round. And he killed 2 deer with 1 bullet. The deer were stacked up, and he shot 2 deer both through the heart with 1 shot. Just burned right. And this is with a soft point expanding bullet, because that's a lot of inertia to bring to a screeching halt, especially if you're shooting a couple feet away.
One real quick point to add to that, because you're absolutely right. One real quick, it actually disproves the argument, because they're not designed to shoot through people, period, because these are being sold to the public and for public use, and it's what you would use for hunting. It's meant because when you're hunting, you don't want to damage and tear up the insides of your game. So you're wanting something that is minimally destructive. It's not about shooting through it to go through to something else. I mean, that's like trick shooting crap that nobody would ever try. It's about minimally destroying the thing that you're hitting so that you can harvest it and eat it. It's
Oh, you mentioned that, by the way, and I've taken my share of big game and took a lot of small game, and I've had to eradicate a few pests, especially when I had barnyard birds and that, because things would come and either kill the birds or, worse, in some cases, you get a raccoon and a chicken coop. It's not a pretty sight what leaves behind. Not that I hated raccoons, just that something had to die, and it was either all my chickens or the raccoon. But when I had the chance, and I was hunting since I was really young, I took headshots, because the headshot doesn't ruin the meat. And I've taken most of my deer with headshots, because I didn't really want a deer head. I wanted the rest of it. And nothing goes anywhere when you shoot it in the head. That's, well, I mean, you shoot its nose off, it might go somewhere, but I'm talking about accurate. And that comes down to knowing your firearm, knowing what you're doing, knowing its limitations. This AR will put 3 bullets in an inch at 100 yards. It's freakishly accurate, and it's 0 to 100 yards. I mean, it's freakishly accurate. Think about it. I'm talking about something smaller than that at 100 yards, as long as you do your part. It's a precision tool, and it's dangerous. And as Daryl said, I would never point it. I don't take empty guns and point them at anything. I've held a couple barrels up to the camera here, and I feel weird doing that, because everything in me says don't do that. I don't know that Kyle had. I mean, I know he didn't have the training I had, because nobody pointed guns at people when I was a kid, and everybody had guns. And nobody did that. I mean, it just wasn't the thing. But then society was different then, as you're alluding to, and that's building backwards engineering the problem here. The problem is, yes, the person who was shot by the cops 7 times, that was a problem. that problem could have been compartmentalized and dealt with. And if there was an issue with the cop or an issue with the alleged criminal, then it should have been dealt with in a court of law, and everyone should have sat on their thumbs until that was dealt with, just like George Floyd. But instead, everyone lost their effing mind. What purpose is there to burn down, businesses in a town where the cop did something? And you go, how does that serve any race, any society, any whatever? And it's just this outgrowth of a much deeper and darker concept, and that's Marxism finding its way into America. BLM cared about Black lives, they would be in Chicago fixing that crap, because Black people are shooting Black people in Chicago, where guns are banned, every weekend. It's horrible. And well, during the week too, of course, but it's dreadful. And the numbers are not small. I mean, I think last weekend was over 40 people shot. Think about that. I mean, in Minnesota, where I live, it's been deer season for the last full week, so 2 weekends. And I haven't heard yet. Usually somebody ends up doing something dumb with a gun. Somehow, 1 or 2 people a year. But it's literally 1 or 2, 500,000 people take high power rifles or shotguns with the job to the field. And out of 500,000 people out there walking around with guns, they'll harvest usually about 30% of them will get deer. And maybe 1 or 2 people end up being shot. And that's tragic. But guns are just a thing. They're a tool. And if they're used, it sounds ridiculous that you can use it safely. Well, think about an automobile. You plop kids into the seat of a 4,000 to 6,000 pound vehicle, send them off down the road at God knows what speed, and hope that they follow the laws and don't bounce off anybody else or run anyone over. We work with dangerous things all the time. It's just, it's the familiarity you have with the dangerous thing and the respect you have for the dangerous thing that causes the results you get from using the said dangerous thing. They probably dropped, a quarter, usually it's a couple 100,000 deer in the last week in Minnesota. And of that, maybe 2 people got shot. And that probably was inexcusable. It usually is. But, Daryl said that, and I've handled some kind of firearm since I was 6 years old. I'm 65. I've never pointed a gun at anybody. And, and I've met people that were very threatening, and what I did, that's why I qualify my statement with Kyle. I was on my own property. I own 40 acres of hardwood forest in central Minnesota. I was up there camping, and I woke up to a bunch of guys walking through my woods, and I walked out. I put my orange on so that they would see me, slung my rifle over my shoulder crosswise behind, so it wasn't ready, but it didn't look threatening. And I just walked up to the guy sitting in my tree and asked him, if he knew that he was on private property. At which point he took his 30-06 bolt action rifle. You know what these things when you're a hunter. He pointed it at my chest. We were about 6-8 feet away, and told me it didn't matter and I should get out of there. Use a whole bunch of expletives, or I'd never leave the woods. The 3 people he was hunting with were within 20 feet of me. So I had 4 people with rifles on my land, all pointing their guns at me. And I carefully walked away, and I put as many trees between us, and I was waiting to be hit. And no one ever did anything. And I went and talked. The cops wouldn't do anything. So I went home and I sold my gun. I sold my deer rifle. I didn't hunt deer for 10 years because I had 3 little kids at home. I was 28 years old. I had 3 kids at home. I had just lost I lost child number 4 and my dad the previous year. And I didn't really want to lose me to my family too in the same year. So I went home, sold my gun. I was really broke up over it because I'd owned this land since I was 18 years old. Whenever the people were getting drunk as a teenager, I bought land and I took care of it. And so my advice to Kyle would have been based on my own advice to myself, that I think now I overreacted to that situation. But on the other hand, I've told people about what happened that day and been told, "I'd have just shot those sons of bitches." You go, really? Really? I had a rifle that was made to take moose down, slung over my shoulder. So you would have taken your rifle down and shot the guy. And then you'd have shot the rest of them so they didn't go and tell a bad story. That's what you'd have done. But, you know, it's amazing what people can do with opinions when they're not in the moment. And I guarantee you, I've played that scenario 5,000 times through my mind. You know, could I have done it better? And I would say no. I think I did the exact right thing. I got out of there. I was as contrite as you can be when you're ordered off your own land at gunpoint. And I got out of there. And I think maybe I could have just put the rifle in a box and waited until I got over it. But I was so hurt that the law enforcement wouldn't do anything. Wouldn't do anything. They said we would have to catch them in the act. I said, well, in the act of what? Killing me on my own land? You know, how often does that happen for you guys? And of course, I was just a 28-year-old kid who was talking to law enforcement like they had something to learn. But I mean, if we can't trust the law, and that's what I'm getting to, backward engineering this problem, we can't trust the law to hold the streets safe. Who do we trust after that? I mean, where do we turn next when the law lets us down? And I don't think that cars are worth anyone dying for. But then again, burning cars doesn't exactly bring the guy who was shot back either, you know, by the cops. And the cops, who have the greatest investment in this, have just decided to not play tonight. We're not going to do this. We're going to go sit at the end of the box with a block with a box full of donuts and just watch shit burn. And just simple, good old-fashioned Southern hospitality, Minnesota nice, good behavior doesn't even enter into the question in these things, because that's ship sailed a long time ago. I asked a local guy. I live within a community of 135 people. It's including the town that's a couple miles up the road, you know. And it's a small town. And I asked the guy when we were working on my car a while back, and I said, what would you do? What would you do if somebody, you know, like these people in Minneapolis, we got out here in the middle of the street, the town is two streets that meet, two highways that meet. That's the town, you know. And there's maybe 30, 40 people live in town. So I asked the guy at the station there, I said, what would you do? What would you know, if somebody's out here just losing his mind? And he'd go, well, probably call the cops and tell them we needed to pick him up. I said, well, what if he started busting stuff up and bashing in windows? And, well, we'd pull out a gun and, you know, and again, and I'm not speaking badly of the person here, but that's what small town America does. You know, you don't have a local cop. So if you come and you start breaking things and becoming a problem, we're going to stop you. And I wouldn't want to be the person to stop somebody from doing that, but I also wouldn't want to go, well, let's just make some popcorn and see how far they go. We've got a problem here is that we have many politicians, and for many reasons, that have backed the mob and demonized the cops in these situations. And the good cops, Tim Pool has brought this up repeatedly, the good cops have probably quit. And that leaves us with the other ones. That's a dangerous recipe all by itself. But I mean, you look at and again, I'm glad this year isn't what it was in the streets, because 2020 was pretty god awful. But I think it's easy to forget what it was like to be there. Again, you know, today there's still streets closed in Minneapolis from the George Floyd incident. But I was talking with somebody, and this, I don't want to be too lengthy here, but there was somebody that I was talking to about this, that you kind of forget what these things are. And I brought this up, I think I brought it up on the show, but I'll say it again for the sake of impact. Cup Foods, which is the store where Floyd tried to pass the check. Now this just backwards engineering the thing all the way to where it start. They sent an 18-year-old out to the car that Floyd and his drug dealer and some woman who did stuff for people were sitting in. Just sitting in there outside of the store. I don't know about what you do. When I go to a store, I go there, I park my vehicle, I go in, I get what I need, and I go back, I put the stuff in the car, and I leave. But they're just sitting out there for a long time. And they send this kid out there to try to get, Floyd to, do something right with the money deal. You go, so over a $20, apparently counterfeit $20 bill, this whole thing gets thrown into motion. Now Floyd could have just driven off. This 18-year-old is standing there going, hey, come back and sit here some more. And the kid goes in and out, I think 3 times, talking to his boss in the store, who had no business sending an 18-year-old out to a car to talk to him about that. And then the whole thing cascades from there. Cops come, they're unable to restrain Floyd. They bring a second car in 20 minutes later. And this is the story. If you watched this, you knew this. 20 minutes later, Chauvin finally puts his hands on this guy, or I think it was like 18 and a half minutes later. From the time the cops arrive, Chauvin's an older cop. He's probably just an asshole. But the 3 of them were unable to put one man in the back seat of a car. And he slithered out onto the ground, and Chauvin just thought, they had called the ambulance, they were coming. The one angle that everyone saw looked like he was kneeling on his neck. He was kneeling on his shoulders. Now, that's not a great way to handle somebody. He probably could have sat him up. They probably could have brought the other cop car, because they had 2 cars, in to sandwich him in, so that sitting out in 38th and Chicago it's a busy intersection. And they could have brought the other cop car in, turned the lights on, and protected him so that he wasn't run over by somebody. But the people, they're just like they are everywhere else. They're texting and listening to the radio and eating food, and they're not paying attention. So they needed to keep the guy from getting run over. And in the process of doing that, apparently from the amount of drugs he was on and stuff, it all just kind of collapsed. Now, no, Chauvin didn't do well, but he didn't choke him. And you saw that if you watched the court. They showed all the cop footage of all the cameras, full length of the time that they had him running at the scene. And all the media kept saying was he choked him, 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 he choked him. He did not choke him. He did not handle him well. I think he was kind of an idiot the way he behaved, but he didn't choke him. And the jury should have been sequestered, but they weren't. They weren't kept from the information. They went back and forth the home every night. They were protesting the streets. They were burning shit down. This is a year later. They're wrecking stuff still, and they're threatening. So the jury went in there and just went, yep, hang him. That's it. He's guilty of everything. He's a murderer. Well, I don't know if he's a murderer or not. I don't think he's a nice guy. But that was an amazing display of not handling the details of the case. I don't expect this to go a whole lot better. I hope it does. I don't expect it to go a whole lot better. I think that, Steve, I wasn't saying that, that somebody should have told the young lad to maybe just, stay home today, but you'd probably tell your kid to stay home in that situation. And I would tell my kid to stay home in that situation, because you're not going to turn the tide on that much insanity by showing up with a pair of purple gloves and your rifle and a little Pelican box with some bandages in it. I think that when you're lighting a dumpster on fire and shoving it into a gas station, somebody damn well better put that out, because something could go wrong. That's, step 1 to blowing the whole station up. All I got to do after that is go over there and flip the pump on and let it go. Who knows what it could turn into. But the whole spin on this thing is no one's talking about the abysmal failure of society to maintain those practical restraints. Like I talked to the guy in town with the station, worked on my car. What would you do if I came in and did that? I said, you know me. You've known me for years now, 12 years or so. What would you do if I did that? Well, I probably wouldn't shoot you, but but he wouldn't let me do that, and we know each other, and we're not friends necessarily, but we're good neighbors. But he wouldn't, just let me go around busting up, what few buildings there are in town and lighting things on fire. Because that would be his job as a good citizen to stop that. Call a cop, but the cops won't get here for 20 minutes. I mean, I live somewhere where if people don't behave themselves, something really bad happens. But the weird consequence of that is everybody seems to know that. And as a result of knowing that, nobody does anything really bad either. Just one more brag for the area. I mean, 15 years, no one's been shot, no one's been knifed, no one's been killed in this county for 15 years, and the records stop at 15 years. So this is what happens when you have a society where there's lots of guns and lots of people that have a moral compass. It just works, I'll be quiet now, and we need to wrap the show here. So.
Yeah, I saw Daryl look like he wanted to say something a few minutes ago. So.
Well, that was a few minutes ago. Actually, though, I do remember it was when he brought up BLM and Antifa. I remember that argument going back and forth about, if they were really about, the name on how to put it, if they really thought Black Lives Matter, I guess that's the best way to put it. And that was kind of the argument. But I think we've gone beyond that now. It's like so many of the things that have been implemented, and I'm pretty well convinced it's a situation of how far can we push, because someone hired those guys. I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious that this was an intention. This was an implant to carry a title that made it sound like we're coming to bat for a race. And it's obvious that everything they've done has made the problem much worse. Many lives have been lost as a result of their action. And it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure these things out. And I think America, to a large degree, is waking up to this, that, if you allow mob rule, if you just allow riots, people to go in and burn and loot and whatever they can think of to do, and then you say, okay, police are the problem, let's get rid of them. I don't know, I've heard analogies. I don't know if I can think of one, but the best I can think of right offhand would, there's a fire here. I've got a bucket of gasoline. Let's throw it on it and see if this will put it out. How many people would think, yeah, that'll work? To me, so many of these things are that obvious, and we've got to admit that and say, we're not going to put up with it. And when I say that, I can go out tomorrow and I'll tell everybody this and I'll fix the problem. Yeah, it'd be nice if it was that simple. But it starts with us talking and realizing, more and more people realizing that this really is the case. And on many levels, one person, Aaron Rodgers, someone like Aaron Rodgers, can get a lot of attention, and a lot of support. It's getting enough people involved to turn it around, and that's either that happens or we all lose. To me, it's down to that.
Let me see if I can add my 2 cents into the conversation during the show, and I apologize for not showing Terry's picture, and let's go ahead and show that, because he was talking about a particular context a few minutes ago, and I thought that was a powerful pick of Terry. Yeah, I mean, the guy, he's not exaggerating about what he's done, and so let's give Terry a big thumbs up. But the point that I keep making is that we have to shoulder responsibility. During the show, right after I quit talking, I was listening to Steve. He was saying something extraordinarily important, very meaningful to me, and I wanted to hear the whole thing, but couldn't, simply because I had my eye not just on the camera, not just on the screen, but also had my eye on my mother. So did my wife. Well, she jumped up out of her wheelchair. And so she has this problem. You know, 1 minute she can go along with the rules that we set up to keep her safe. The next minute she forgets about them, and this is due to, let's say, an illness. And so my point is, during this show, my mother has jumped up 10 times. Now, during a 24-hour-a-day period, she can get out of bed, try to walk and fall. And so what do my wife and I do? We sleep on pins and needles. And I'm sharing this information to simply say that, in a sense, our society has become very much like that. People are sleeping on pins and needles because they know that, in a societal sense, something is wrong. Something is wrong, almost like having, and I'm going to say it the Southern way, almost like having dementia. You don't know what's going to happen. And so we have people who are rushing, trying to figure out a way to help this one and that one and so on and so on. And you don't know what to do, because every time that we try to reach out to my mother, trying to say, hey, if you wear a seatbelt in a wheelchair, this is going to keep you safe. Well, you're binding me, and all of this, all of the complaining that goes along with it. And I get that. But I'm thankful for those people who said, you know, you can be a little bit uncomfortable in your car when you drive it, because seat belts actually save lives. And, you know, if you have a seat belt on when you're in a wheelchair and you have a dementia and you forget that you can't get up, but you, without assistance, you know, you may need to have something like a seat belt. And so we never restrain her. We just try to make sure that, you know, we're trying to keep her safe. But, you know, it's so difficult. And so my heart goes out to all of those of you who have taken care of your parents, your loved ones, and so on. Those of you in hospitals who have tried to, you know, be there for every patient. And it's not like healthcare workers don't care. You just don't have enough time to have people in the room at all times. That would be far too expensive. And so we're going to get out of here. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. But thank you guys for always being here in our lives. We love you very much.
So you've come a long way in your theology. In other words, you were raised in a system and taught by a man who believed that he was, you know, he acted like he was raised in hell or born and lived there. And now you don't even believe in hell. And essentially, you really don't even believe that your grandchildren need to get saved before you can say that they can go to heaven. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe they need to get saved.
In what sense?
But they need to get saved from this theology that's going around.
I agree with you.
They really do. I mean, this is some of the worst stuff I ever heard. And the more I listen to it, the worse it sounds.
So you don't think we ought to stone people for picking up firewood on the Sabbath?
Well, no, I think that probably went out when I was a kid, you know. Most people don't pick up firewood. I did when I was a kid. And my daddy would whip me if I didn't. So he didn't stone me, but
he didn't stone. Okay. Jesus Did he come here 2,000 years ago because his father was so angry and resented mankind, and he was holding on to all of these records of wrongs? Did Jesus come along and atone for our sins, or did he do something different?
You know, you go back to the islands, some of these islands where I've been, and well, you could even go to Hawaii, and there's still people that go up on the mountain there and they offer up offerings and sacrifices and praise and stuff, trying to appease angry gods. Well, that's paganism. You can come up with all kinds of stories if you believe in Trinity theology. But when you realize that Jesus is the Father, because the book says his name shall be called Everlasting Father. We don't have an angry God that's upset. First of all, if the writing is true, that he doesn't keep a record of wrongs, according to 13 of 1 Corinthians, what's he got to be angry about?
That's true.
And if he don't have anything to be angry about, he's not, and God doesn't go around, you know, with this, carrying this anger like man does. He doesn't do that. And so, no, Jesus did not have to shed blood to take care of that, because if God never remembered a man's transgression or his sin, then why would there have to be an atonement made for it?
In other words, if you don't hold a record of wrongs or keep a record of wrongs, in fact, he says he doesn't even want to be reminded of it. He will not remember our sins. He's not into that. What he's into is actually helping his created children. And so what would be the necessity of atonement? What would be the necessity of propitiation is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, well, you know, he said in the Hebrew that you've made these sacrifices and offerings to me, and he said, I never asked them, and he said, though the law demanded them, he said, I didn't like them, I didn't want them.
What does that suggest about the law?
That suggests it was a lie. God is saying, you're out here teaching that you got to offer up a billy goat or a sheep, and you know, to get rid of your sins. And I never asked for that, and I wasn't pleased with it. Nobody can tell me that you can go out here and commit sins and then chop a goat's head off and then you're all right. I mean, why would anybody believe stuff like that?
So you're saying that God's not pleased with the death of Christ, that isn't taking care of our sins. That's not the issue.
I think that in the death of Jesus, there was at least two things accomplished. One was, by his death, the scripture said, greater love hath no man than this, than to lay his life down for his friends. I think that Jesus showed us how much he loved us. Second, I think that through his death, that he literally abolished the law. Now, if that's what you want to follow, is a law that condemns you all the time you live and can't help you when you need help and then kills you. But here's a God that gives you life eternal and helps you in every way. And then people say, oh, give us the law, take us back to the law. I think people got brain damage.
I agree with you. What would you tell your great grandchildren right now if you could share with them a message?
That you like to live till you come along.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. But what do we want to give our great grandchildren? what do we need to give them?
It would be nice if we could give them a Bible that was a Bible about God and the truth about God, instead of just stories that somebody's made up or carried down through history or these things. And I'm not trying to belittle what men have done, but I am saying that I think that there is a lot of misguided people representing God throughout the Old Testament.